On my 45th birthday, my wife's lawyer served me papers at work. She gets everything, including full custody, he gloated. Your children don't even want your name anymore. I smiled and handed him a sealed envelope. Deliver this to your client. By evening, my phone exploded, her mother crying. How could you know our 25-year-old secret? You know what's funny about turning 45? Everyone tells you it's supposed to be this milestone moment. Like you've officially crossed into the distinguished gentleman phase of life where you start wearing reading glasses on a chain and complaining about music being too loud. Well, let me tell you something about milestones. Sometimes they're less like celebration markers and more like tombstones for the life you thought you had. And my 45th birthday? That sucker was about to become the gravestone for my entire marriage, complete with a sleazy eulogy delivered by a guy who looked like he bought his law degree from a vending machine. I was sitting in my office at Reynolds Risk Consulting, which sounds way fancier than it actually is, though I'll admit the view isn't half bad. 18th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown, the kind of setup that makes clients think you're successful enough to solve their problems. The irony, of course, is that I spend my days helping Fortune 500 companies figure out who's stabbing them in the back, tracking down corporate leaks and insider threats like some kind of white-collar detective, and yet I apparently missed the biggest betrayal happening right under my own roof. But we'll get to that part later, because right now, I'm mid-sip of my overpriced Starbucks, Grande Americano, 2 shots of espresso, because apparently regular coffee isn't complicated enough anymore. When this guy walks in wearing what I can only describe as the world's saddest attempt at professional attire. The suit was off the rack from somewhere that rhymes with Ben's Warehouse. Probably cost him about $150, and the tie. Oh man, the tie. Looked like it had been attacked by a printer running out of ink. But it was his face that really sold the whole package. This smug little smirk that told me he thought he was about to ruin my entire day, and he was absolutely loving every second of it. He walked in like he owned the place, like he'd rehearsed this moment in front of his bathroom mirror while pointing finger guns at his reflection, and I already knew whatever was coming out of his mouth was going to be premium-grade bullshit. Mr. Reynolds? He said. And even the way he said my name had this theatrical quality to it, like he was announcing the defendant at a murder trial. I set down my coffee, which was already getting cold because apparently the laws of thermodynamics don't care about your dramatic moments, and looked at him with the kind of blank expression I've perfected over years of dealing with people who think they're smarter than me. Yes. Happy birthday, he said, and that smirk got wider, which I didn't think was physically possible without his face cracking in half. Then he reached into his discount briefcase and pulled out this thick manila envelope, the kind they use in movies when someone's getting served papers or inheriting a haunted mansion. He slid it across my desk with the kind of flourish that suggested he'd been practicing that move too, probably in the same bathroom mirror session with the finger guns. Your wife is filing for divorce. Now, here's the thing about working in corporate intelligence for over a decade. You learn to control your reactions. You learn that the person who panics first loses, and the person who shows emotion is the person who gets played. So instead of doing what any normal human being might do, like, I don't know, showing surprise or anger or literally any emotion at all, I just sat there, hands folded on my desk, and let him continue his little performance. She's taking the house, the cars, and full custody, he continued, clearly enjoying himself way too much. He was ticking items off like he was reading a shopping list at the world's worst grocery store. Also, and this is where he paused for dramatic effect, because apparently this guy moonlights in community theater. Your children don't even want your name anymore. That last part was supposed to be the kill shot, I could tell. That was supposed to be the moment where I crumbled, where the successful businessman facade cracked and revealed the broken man underneath. He probably expected tears or begging, or maybe some kind of desperate plea negotiation right there on the spot. He wanted to see me suffer, and honestly, I couldn't even blame him for that. Lawyers get paid to destroy people, and he was probably getting a nice little bonus for delivering this particular package of misery on my birthday of all days. The timing was chef's kiss level petty, and I had to respect the commitment to maximum emotional damage. But here's what discount James Bond didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, because people like him never bother to do their homework beyond whatever their clients tell them. I've been preparing for this conversation for 6 months. 6 months. While my wife thought she was being clever, sneaking around, deleting text messages, and meeting her business partner at hotels that charge by the hour, I was doing what I do best, documenting everything, building my case, and preparing for the inevitable war that was about to kick off. So instead of breaking down, instead of giving him the satisfaction he so desperately craved, I smiled. Not a big smile, nothing crazy, just this small, calm smile that probably confused the hell out of him. Then I opened my desk drawer, the bottom left one that I keep locked specifically for occasions like this, and pulled out my own envelope. Smaller than his, sealed with actual wax because I'm petty like that, and definitely heavier because the contents weren't just paper. They were pure, concentrated truth bombs waiting to explode. Cute, I said, keeping my voice level and relaxed, like we were discussing the weather or comparing notes on Netflix shows. You deliver that speech well. Probably practiced it in the car on the way over, didn't you? I stood up, walked around my desk, and handed him the envelope. Here's the thing, though. I need you to deliver this to your client. Today. As soon as possible, actually. Consider it my birthday gift to her. He took the envelope, and I could see the confusion starting to crack through that smug exterior. He was holding it like it might bite him, turning it over in his hands like maybe if he looked at it from the right angle, he'd understand what was happening. But he didn't understand, because people like him never understand until it's way too late. What is this? He asked, and now the confidence was wavering, just a little bit. Just some light reading, I said, walking back to my chair and picking up my coffee, which was definitely cold now, but I took a sip anyway because power moves aren't about comfort. They're about sending messages. Family history, you might say. Old stories, buried secrets, that kind of thing. You know how it is. Every family has skeletons in their closet. Some families just have more interesting skeletons than others. He left after that, still looking confused but also starting to look worried, which was exactly the vibe I was going for. I watched him walk out through my glass office walls, watched him get into his sad little sedan that probably had more than 100,000 miles on it. And then I sat back down and did something I'd been waiting to do for a very long time. I finished my cold coffee and started the countdown. The rest of the afternoon passed like any other Wednesday, which was wild considering my personal life was currently exploding like a soap opera written by someone who got paid by the twist. I had meetings, conference calls, reviewed some client files, and pretended that my phone wasn't about to become the center of a Category 5 shitstorm. Around 3 o'clock, my assistant Sarah brought in a birthday cupcake with a single candle, because she's thoughtful like that, and I blew it out while making a wish that was definitely about to come true. By 6 p.m., exactly when I'd predicted because I'm good at my job and I understand how information flows, my phone started ringing. And not just regular ringing. I'm talking nuclear meltdown level communication chaos. First it was Juliana, my soon-to-be ex-wife, calling from 4 different numbers because I'd blocked the first 3. Then it was her lawyer, Mr. Discount sued himself, probably panicking because he'd just realized he'd walked into a trap. Then came the calls I'd really been waiting for. Senator Edward Walsh, my father-in-law, voice tight with barely controlled rage, and Judge Margaret Walsh, my mother-in-law, who went straight past rage and landed directly on sobbing. How could you know our 25-year-old secret? She wailed through the phone. And I could hear her husband in the background trying to damage control, probably calculating how quickly they could make this whole thing disappear the same way they'd made that other thing disappear 2.5 decades ago. I put the phone on speaker, poured myself 2 fingers of the good whiskey I keep in my bottom desk drawer for special occasions, and leaned back in my chair, feet up on the desk like some kind of noir detective who just cracked the case of the century. Happy birthday to me, I said to absolutely no one, raising my glass to my reflection in the darkening window. Outside, the city lights were starting to twinkle on, and somewhere out there, the Walsh family dynasty was realizing that you can't bury the past forever, especially when you mess with someone who literally gets paid to dig up buried information. I took a slow sip of whiskey, let it burn down my throat in that satisfying way expensive liquor does, and whispered to myself with the kind of satisfaction that comes from knowing you've just won a game that the other players didn't even know they were playing. Checkmate. All right, so now that we've established that my birthday turned into what can only be described as a legal nuclear war with a side of family drama, I should probably introduce myself properly, because if you're going to watch someone's life implode in spectacular fashion, you should at least know whose life you're watching burn. My name is Carter Reynolds, and as of today, this blessed, cursed, absolutely insane Wednesday in October, I'm officially 45 years old, which means I'm at that age where I'm supposed to be having a midlife crisis involving a sports car and questionable facial hair choices. But instead, I'm having what I like to call a midlife reckoning, which is basically a crisis except everyone else is the one panicking. I'm the founder and CEO of Reynolds Risk Consulting, which sounds like one of those vague corporate names that could mean literally anything. And honestly, that's kind of the point. We're a corporate investigation firm, the kind of outfit that Fortune 500 companies call when they've got a problem they can't solve with their regular security team and can't risk going public with. Someone's leaking trade secrets to competitors? Call Reynolds. Suspicious insider trading patterns before major announcements? Reynolds. Executive's personal assistant suddenly buying a beach house on a $50,000 salary? You guessed it, Reynolds. We're basically the guys who show up when things have already gone wrong and everyone's desperately trying to figure out who to fire and possibly prosecute. I built this company from nothing about 12 years ago, right after I left military intelligence, because apparently spending your 20s and early 30s learning how to track terrorist cells and decode enemy communications makes you weirdly qualified to catch white-collar criminals. The transition from military to civilian life is supposed to be hard, but for me it was like switching from expert mode to easy mode. Corporate criminals are just so much sloppier than the people I used to chase. They think deleting an email actually deletes it. They use their birthdays as passwords, and they somehow believe that having an affair with their secretary in the same hotel every Tuesday won't establish a pattern. It's almost adorable, really, except when it's happening in your own marriage, and then it's just sad. Speaking of my marriage, let me introduce you to Juliana Walsh Reynolds, age 37, owner of more designer handbags than most department stores, and current holder of the title Woman Who Thought She Could Outsmart an Intelligence Professional. Juliana is, or I guess was, since we're doing the whole divorce thing now, my wife of 9 years, though if we're being technical, she stopped being my wife in any meaningful sense about 3 years ago when she decided that our marriage vows had an expiration date, and hers had apparently gone bad like milk left out on the counter. She's beautiful, I'll give her that. The kind of beautiful that turns heads in restaurants and makes other women whisper in bathroom lines. 5'7", blonde hair that costs more to maintain than my car payments, and this smile that she deploys like a tactical weapon whenever she needs something. We met at a charity gala about 10 years ago, one of those black tie events where rich people pretend to care about poor people for 3 hours while drinking champagne that costs more than most people's monthly rent. I was there because one of my clients had dragged me along, and she was there because she was on the board of some foundation her mother ran, probably as a tax write-off. She approached me at the bar, which should have been my first red flag, because confident, beautiful women don't usually approach me. I'm more of a quietly competent in the corner type, and told me she admired strong men who protect people. At the time, I thought she meant it. Turns out what she actually meant was men with money who won't ask too many questions, but hindsight is 20/20 and all that. Now, Juliana didn't come from nothing. She came from something, and that something is the Walsh family, which in this city is basically political royalty if political royalty was built on questionable ethics and strategic memory loss. Her father is Senator Edward Walsh, currently serving his 4th term representing our fine state and consistently voting for whatever benefits him and his donor friends most. He's got that perfect politician look, all white teeth and firm handshakes and absolutely zero genuine emotion behind his eyes. I've seen robots with more authentic human responses. Her mother is Judge Margaret Walsh, who sits on the state Supreme Court and has built her entire career on being tough on crime, which is hilarious considering the skeletons in her closet could fill their own cemetery, but we'll get to that later. The Walsh family is the kind of family that gets streets named after them and has their portraits hanging in government buildings, the kind of family where everyone knows everyone and favors get traded like baseball cards. Juliana grew up in that world, where image is everything and actual substance is optional, where problems get solved with phone calls to the right people and money changes hands in ways that never quite make it into public records. She learned from the best how to smile for cameras, how to say absolutely nothing while using a lot of words, and how to make people feel important right before she uses them for whatever she needs. Drama doesn't just run in her bloodline. It practically has its own dedicated circulatory system. From our marriage came 2 kids, and this is the part that actually hurts. Because Connor and Madison are genuinely great children who got stuck in the middle of their parents' war. Connor just turned 8, and he's got this scary smart thing going on where he reads books about quantum physics for fun and asks questions that make his teachers nervous. Madison is 6, and she's got her mother's looks, but, I hope, not her personality. Though at 6 it's hard to tell if someone's going to grow up to be a decent human or a narcissist. Right now they're both convinced I'm the villain in this story because mommy has been running a very effective propaganda campaign, telling them that daddy is mean and daddy doesn't love them and daddy is the reason we can't be a happy family anymore. It's amazing how quickly kids will believe whatever the parent with primary custody tells them, especially when that parent knows exactly how to weaponize their emotions. But here's the thing about being trained in military intelligence. Here's what 12 years of tracking bad guys and uncovering conspiracies teaches you. When someone declares war on you, when someone decides that you're the enemy and they're going to destroy you, you don't panic. You don't freak out. You don't start making desperate moves, and you definitely don't show your hand until you've got all your pieces in position. No, what you do is something way more effective. Something that most people never think to do because they're too busy reacting instead of planning. You document everything. Every text message, every phone call, every bank transaction, every suspicious late-night meeting. Every time they say they're at yoga, but their location shows them at a hotel downtown. You become a data collection machine, a human surveillance operation focused on one target, and you do it so quietly, so carefully, that they never even know they're being watched. You smile. You nod, you play the oblivious husband, and the whole time you're building a case that would make prosecutors jealous. Because that's what they don't teach you in marriage counseling. That's what the self-help books don't mention. Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes commitment doesn't matter. And sometimes the person you trusted most in the world is the person who's going to betray you the worst. And when that happens, when you realize that the life you thought you had was actually just a performance put on for your benefit, you've got 2 choices. You can fall apart, play the victim, let them take everything while you cry about how unfair life is. Or you can do what I did. You can prepare for war. Not the loud kind of war with yelling and throwing things and dramatic confrontations that end up on social media. No, the quiet kind, the strategic kind, the kind of war where you're 3 moves ahead and they don't even know the game has started. The kind where you let them think they're winning right up until the moment you flip the board and reveal that you've been playing a completely different game the entire time. That's what the past 6 months have been for me. One long strategic preparation for this exact moment. This birthday ambush that Juliana thought was going to destroy me. She thought she had it all figured out. Thought she'd timed it perfectly for maximum emotional damage. Thought she'd finally get to trade in her disappointing husband for a newer model, while taking half my assets and both my kids. What she didn't count on was that I'm really, really good at my job, and my job is finding out things people don't want found. She didn't count on the fact that spending 12 years in military intelligence makes you paranoid in all the right ways. And she definitely didn't count on me being petty enough to wait until she struck first, just so I could hit back. 10 times harder. So yeah, that's me. Carter Reynolds, 45 years old, corporate investigator, soon-to-be divorced father of 2, and apparently the kind of person who ruins lives when properly motivated. Welcome to my midlife crisis, where instead of buying a Corvette and dating 25-year-olds, I'm destroying a political dynasty and reclaiming my entire life. Trust me, it's way more satisfying than a sports car. Let me tell you about the 2 things Juliana loved more than anything else in this world, and spoiler alert, neither of them was me. Which honestly I should have figured out way earlier, but apparently I'm an idiot when it comes to my own life despite being a genius at dissecting everyone else's. The first thing she loved was luxury handbags, and I'm not talking about your normal, oh that's a nice purse kind of bags. I'm talking about the kind of bags that cost more than some people's cars, the kind that come in orange boxes with ribbons and have waiting lists longer than the DMV on a Monday morning. Hermes, Chanel, Louis Vuitton. She collected them like some people collect stamps or baseball cards, except each item in her collection could probably fund a small country's education system for a year. Our walk-in closet, which was roughly the size of most people's bedrooms, had an entire wall dedicated to these things. all lined up like little leather trophies celebrating her ability to spend my money in increasingly creative ways. The second thing she loved was attention, and this one was way more dangerous than the handbag obsession because at least bags just sit there looking expensive. Attention requires an audience, and Juliana needed constant validation like normal people need oxygen. She needed people looking at her, admiring her, telling her she was beautiful and special and amazing. And I'll be honest, I tried to give her that attention for the first few years of our marriage. I really did. I complimented her outfits, showed up to her charity events, played the role of supportive husband, but apparently I wasn't giving her enough of whatever it was she needed, or maybe I was just too boring, too focused on work, too much of a regular guy who thought marriage meant partnership instead of perpetual performance art. So she found someone who could give her that attention, someone who looked at her like she was the only person in the room, someone who had abs you could see through his shirt and the intellectual depth of a puddle in a parking lot. Enter Brandon Pierce, personal trainer, aspiring real estate mogul, and current holder of the title, Dumbest Man to Ever Think He Was Smart. Brandon is 32, which already tells you everything you need to know about where Juliana's head was at. She wanted someone younger, someone who made her feel like she wasn't approaching 40, someone who probably told her she looked like she was still in her 20s, even though everyone with functioning eyeballs could see that ship had sailed. Brandon's entire personality can be summed up by his Instagram bio, which I'm not even joking about this. Genuinely read, fitness entrepreneur, real estate investor, living my best life, flexed biceps house. The emoji use alone should have been a criminal offense, but what really killed me was the real estate investor part, because this guy couldn't invest in a winning lottery ticket if someone handed him the numbers. He worked at one of those chain gyms where the membership costs $19 a month and the equipment looks like it was salvaged from a 1980s prison, and his big claim to fame was that he once helped some minor local celebrity lose 20 pounds for a wedding, which apparently qualified him to lecture people about optimizing their lifestyle on social media. Now, Juliana met Brandon at, where else? The gym, because apparently that's where midlife crises go to find validation these days. She'd hired him as her personal trainer, which I was actually fine with at first because she'd been complaining about wanting to get in shape, and I figured having a professional help her was better than listening to her talk about starting another diet she'd quit in 3 days. What I didn't anticipate was that personal training would turn into personal relationship. But honestly, I should have seen it coming the second I met this guy, because he had that specific kind of confidence that only comes from being good-looking enough that people let you get away with being stupid. The first time Brandon came to our house, because apparently working out at the gym wasn't good enough, she needed private sessions in our home gym. I watched him walk in wearing pants so tight I could see his religion, a tank top that might as well have been painted on, and enough cologne to fumigate a small apartment building. The cologne was called something ridiculous like fierce or intensity, or maybe just lawsuit. I don't remember exactly, but it smelled like someone had bottled the concept of trying too hard and added notes of desperation. He shook my hand with this grip that was trying way too hard to prove something, looked me in the eye with this smile that was probably supposed to be friendly but came off as predatory, and called me boss, like we were suddenly best friends. "Great to meet you, boss," he said, and I remember thinking that nobody who calls you boss in your own house is actually respecting you as a boss. "Your wife's been telling me all about you. Corporate security, right? That's awesome, man. Real Jason Bourne stuff." I wasn't corporate security. I ran a corporate investigation firm, and it was nothing like Jason Bourne, but correcting him would have required him to understand the difference, and I was pretty sure that was asking too much. So I just smiled, said something non-committal, and watched him follow Juliana downstairs to the gym while I mentally calculated how long it would take before this turned into exactly what it eventually turned into. The affair, because let's just call it what it was, started sometime around month 2 of the training sessions, which I know because that's when Juliana suddenly got really interested in business opportunities and started talking about investing in real estate. Not just buying a rental property or something normal like that, but becoming Brandon's business partner in some vague development project that was definitely going to make them both millionaires and definitely wasn't just an excuse to spend more time together. She started having these business meetings that ran late into the evening, started taking calls in other rooms with the door closed, started being on her phone constantly while sitting right next to me on the couch, and the whole time she's explaining that she's building their portfolio, and diversifying their investments, like I'm supposed to believe that she suddenly became a real estate expert by sleeping with a guy who thinks equity is just a fancy word for expensive. Brandon, to his credit, actually believed he was a business genius, which was almost endearing in how delusional it was. He'd talk about flipping properties and building wealth and creating passive income streams with the confidence of someone who'd watched 3 YouTube videos and thought he'd earned an MBA. The reality was that he was broke, living in a studio apartment with furniture from IKEA, and not even the good IKEA stuff, the stuff from the as-is section that's probably structurally unsound, and driving a leased BMW that he could barely afford but needed because apparently image is everything when you're trying to convince people you're successful. His idea of a business partnership with Juliana was basically just having her fund everything while he contributed his expertise, which as far as I could tell consisted of knowing a guy who knew a guy who sometimes flipped houses. He couldn't spell dumbbell without autocorrect. I know this because I saw a text message where he spelled it dumbbell, which isn't even close. And yet somehow he thought he was qualified to lecture people about building wealth and making smart investments. He wore watches that looked expensive but were actually $40 knockoffs you could buy at the mall, the kind with fake diamonds that fall off if you look at them too hard. And he drove that BMW like it was proof of his success instead of proof of his ability to make bad financial decisions. The really hilarious part, the part that almost made me laugh except it was my marriage imploding, so it wasn't actually funny, was watching them think they were being sneaky. They thought I didn't notice the late-night texts, the way she'd change her clothes 3 times before going to yoga, the fact that her yoga sessions always seemed to happen at times when the actual yoga studio was closed. They thought deleting their messages meant I couldn't see them, thought that using his phone instead of hers for the really incriminating stuff meant there was no trail, thought that booking hotels under his name instead of hers created some kind of plausible deniability. But here's the thing about being married to someone who investigates people for a living. You should probably assume that person knows how to investigate you too. Every deleted text, every cash withdrawal, every business lunch that showed up on credit card statements, I saw it all. I watched them build their little fantasy world where they were going to run off together and live this amazing life funded by my money and my assets. And the whole time, I'm just sitting back thinking, okay, let them cook. Let them think they're getting away with it. Because every chef eventually burns the kitchen, and I'm going to be right here when the smoke alarm goes off. Brandon thought he was Socrates in a tight shirt, some kind of philosopher entrepreneur who'd figured out the secrets of life and success. In reality, he was just another himbo who'd confused being attractive with being intelligent, and now he was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. Never get involved in a war between a trained intelligence operative and his wife, because you're not a player in that game. You're just collateral damage waiting to happen. Here's what 12 years in military intelligence teaches you that most people never learn. When you discover you've been betrayed, when you realize that someone you trusted has been lying to your face for months or maybe years, the absolute worst thing you can do is react immediately. Normal people, they find out their spouse is cheating and they blow up, start screaming, throwing things, posting cryptic messages on Facebook that everyone knows are about their relationship drama, and basically announcing to the entire world that they're hurt and angry and out of control. That's exactly what the other side wants, because when you're emotional, when you're reactive, you make mistakes. You show your hand too early. You give away your strategy, and you end up losing a war you could have won if you just kept your mouth shut and played the long game. So when I confirmed what I'd suspected for months, that Juliana was sleeping with her discount personal trainer and planning to take me for everything I had, I didn't yell. I didn't confront her, didn't leave passive-aggressive notes around the house, didn't dramatically throw her stuff on the lawn like they do in movies. No, I did something way more effective and infinitely more satisfying. I opened up Excel, created a new spreadsheet with multiple tabs, and started documenting every single thing I could find. Call me boring, call me a nerd, call me whatever you want. But there's something deeply therapeutic about organizing someone's betrayal into neat little rows and columns with color-coded categories and cross-reference data points. I started tracking everything, and I mean everything. Bank statements going back 3 years, because financial infidelity almost always comes before physical infidelity. People start hiding money before they start hiding themselves. Credit card charges that didn't make sense, like the time she claimed she was at a work conference in Chicago, but her credit card got charged at a hotel in our own city, or the mysterious cash withdrawals that happened every Tuesday afternoon right before her yoga classes. I tracked her location data, not in a creepy stalker way, but in a My Phone plan includes family tracking, and she never bothered to turn it off way, which showed me that her charity luncheons were happening at suspiciously hotel-adjacent locations, and her business meetings seemed to take place in the parking lots of establishments that definitely didn't conduct business. Then there were the charity lunches, which, let me tell you, became my favorite category in the spreadsheet because the sheer audacity of using charity work as a cover for an affair is kind of impressive in its awfulness. Juliana was on the board of like 17 different charitable organizations, mostly because it looked good for her mother's political career and gave her an excuse to buy expensive dresses for fundraising galas, and she leveraged that involvement into the perfect alibi. "Sorry, honey, can't make dinner tonight. I have a foundation board meeting," she'd say, kissing my cheek and smelling like she'd bathed in department store perfume. And then she'd disappear for 4 hours to do absolutely anything except attend a board meeting. I started calling her assistant at these organizations, playing the concerned husband who wanted to send flowers to his wife's office after her long meetings. And you know what I discovered? Half those meetings didn't exist, and the other half ended at least 2 hours before she came home. The late-night business meetings were even better, and by better, I mean more insulting to my intelligence, because apparently Juliana thought that real estate development happens at 10 p.m. on weeknights and requires her to dress like she's going to a nightclub. She'd come home at midnight smelling like hotel soap. And yes, different hotels have different soap smells. You learn this kind of thing when you're paying attention, with this glow that definitely didn't come from negotiating property contracts. And she'd tell me about how she and Brandon had been running numbers and analyzing market trends until late. The only thing they were analyzing was how much of my money they could steal, and the only numbers they were running were probably the room service charges. But the real gold mine, the absolute jackpot of evidence, came from Juliana's laptop. She had this MacBook Air that she guarded like it contained nuclear launch codes, always closing it when I walked into the room, always taking it with her even when she went to get coffee, always making sure it was password protected with what she probably thought was a clever password. Here's a pro tip for anyone planning to have an affair. Don't use your anniversary date as your laptop password, especially when you're cheating on the person you have that anniversary with. It's like announcing, "I'm betraying you," with every login. I waited until she was out at one of her fake charity events. This one supposedly about helping underprivileged children, which is ironic considering she was about to make her own children underprivileged by destroying their family. And I sat down with that laptop and went to work. She'd deleted her messages, cleared her browser history, even emptied her trash folder, and she probably felt really clever about it, like she'd just committed the perfect crime. What she didn't know, what people never seem to understand, is that deleting something doesn't actually delete it. It just tells the computer that it's okay to write over that space eventually. But until that happens, all that data is still sitting right there, just waiting for someone who knows what they're doing to come along and recover it. 3 hours later, armed with some recovery software that's technically legal but feels illegal because of how powerful it is, I had reconstructed her entire digital life for the past year. Every message, every photo, every email, every Google search that she thought had disappeared into the void, all of it sitting in a folder on my external hard drive, organized by date and contact. It was like Christmas morning, except instead of presents, I was unwrapping evidence of my wife's affair, which is significantly less festive but way more useful in divorce proceedings. The messages were honestly kind of pathetic, and I don't mean that in a bitter way. I mean they were objectively pathetic. Lots of, "I miss you, baby," and "can't wait to see you tonight," and the kind of lovey-dovey garbage that sounds romantic when you're 14, but just seems sad when you're approaching 40 and betraying your husband. But the real gems were the ones where they talked strategy, where they discussed their plans for after the divorce, how they were going to use my money to fund their new life together. There was one message from Brandon that genuinely made me laugh, where he told her, "Once we get your husband's money, we can finally start living the life we deserve." Like he'd somehow earned the right to my assets by doing bicep curls and having abs. My personal favorite was a text from Juliana that said, "Brandon, he still thinks I'm at yoga face with tears of joy." complete with a crying laughing emoji like this was the funniest joke in the world. Joke's on you, sweetheart, because yoga doesn't take place at the Ritz-Carlton, and it definitely doesn't take place in room 1408, which became your regular Tuesday afternoon spot, because apparently you too are creatures of habit. I had the hotel receipts. I had the room service charges. I even had the parking garage timestamps showing exactly when she arrived and when she left, and the durations were always the same, about 2.5 hours, which I guess is how long it takes to destroy a 9-year marriage and also order overpriced club sandwiches. But here's where it gets really interesting, where my investigation went from catching a cheating wife to uncovering something way bigger and darker. While I was digging through Juliana's digital life, I stumbled across something that had nothing to do with her affair and everything to do with her family. There was an old PDF file, buried in a folder within another folder, like someone had tried to hide it in the digital equivalent of a maze. The file was titled Walsh_case_1999_sealed, and the moment I saw that word sealed, my intelligence training kicked in, because sealed files are sealed for a reason, and that reason is usually that someone powerful wanted something buried. I opened it, and what I found was basically a roadmap to destroying the Walsh family dynasty. It was a police report, or rather a police report that had been modified, edited, and essentially rewritten to change the entire narrative of what happened. The original incident was a hit and run from 25 years ago, back when Juliana's mother Margaret was just starting her legal career and her father Edward was running for his first term in the state Senate. Someone had been hit by a car late at night, seriously injured, and the original report had suspect information that pointed toward a vehicle registered to the Walsh family. But then the report had been amended, details had been changed, witness statements had been clarified, and eventually the whole thing had just disappeared, sealed away with the kind of legal maneuvering that only money and political connections can buy. The file had everything. The original report, the amended versions showing exactly what had been changed, bank records showing payments to various people involved in the case, and even some handwritten notes that appeared to be from Judge Walsh herself, discussing how to manage the narrative and protect the family's future. It was the kind of evidence that ends careers, destroys legacies, and sends people to prison, and it had been sitting on my wife's laptop this entire time, probably because her mother had sent it to her years ago and Juliana had forgotten it existed. So now I had something way better than proof of an affair. I had leverage, the kind of nuclear-level leverage that makes people very nervous and very cooperative. I had evidence that the Walsh family, these pillars of the community who built their entire image on law and order and family values, had covered up a serious crime and destroyed evidence to protect their political ambitions. And the best part was that they had no idea I had it. No idea that while they were planning to take my kids and my money, I was sitting on information that could end all of them. I created a new tab in my spreadsheet, labeled it Insurance Policy, and started organizing this new treasure trove of career-ending documentation. Then I sat back, looked at my work, and realized that Juliana and her family had made a critical mistake. They'd brought a knife to a gunfight, and I'd brought an entire arsenal. Checkmate was coming. They just didn't know it yet. Once I had all my evidence compiled, organized, and safely backed up in about 17 different locations because I'm paranoid like that, I did something that probably confused the hell out of Juliana. I became the perfect husband. Not in a creepy, trying too hard way that would have been obvious, but in a subtle, natural way that made her think maybe her guilt was finally working on me. Maybe I was sensing something was wrong and trying to fix our marriage before it completely fell apart. Little did she know that I wasn't trying to save anything. I was just giving her enough rope to hang herself with. And apparently I'm the kind of petty that enjoys watching people tie their own nooses. I started acting normal. And by normal, I mean maybe too normal, like suspiciously normal, the kind of normal where you're so aggressively fine with everything that it almost circles back around to being weird. I'd wake up early and make her coffee, exactly the way she liked it with that overpriced oat milk that costs more than regular milk for no reason except marketing. I'd kiss her cheek when she left for her meetings, tell her to have a good day, and ask about her work when she came home smelling like hotel soap and lies. I'd smile and nod when she talked about Brandon's amazing real estate insights, even though listening to her repeat his nonsense was like getting a root canal performed by someone who learned dentistry from YouTube. On our anniversary, which was particularly hilarious timing considering she was actively planning to divorce me. I took her to that fancy restaurant she loved, the one where appetizers cost $40 and you leave hungry because they believe in portion control or whatever excuse rich people use for serving tiny food on giant plates. I bought her flowers, told her she looked beautiful, and played the role of devoted husband so convincingly that I could see the guilt flickering across her face every time she looked at me. She actually teared up at one point, and I remember thinking, yeah, cry it out now, because you're going to be crying a lot more later when this all comes crashing down. But the real Oscar-worthy performance came when I upgraded her car. She'd been complaining about her Mercedes for months, saying it was getting old. It was 3 years old, which in normal people world means it's basically brand new. But in Juliana's world, anything over 2 years old is basically a fossil. So I surprised her with a brand new one. Same model, but the latest year, with all the bells and whistles she wanted. Cost me about 80 grand, which sounds insane, and it was insane. But here's the thing. I knew that in a few months when the divorce went through, that car was going to be mine anyway, and watching her face light up thinking she'd manipulated me into buying it was worth every penny just for the dramatic irony. She thought guilt was working, thought that on some subconscious level I knew something was wrong, and I was overcompensating by throwing money and attention at the problem. She'd hug me and say things like, "I don't deserve you," while Brandon was probably waiting in some hotel room wondering why she was running late. And I'd just smile and think, "You're absolutely right. You don't deserve me, but not in the way you think." The whole thing was like performing in a play where only I knew the actual ending, and everyone else was just improvising their way toward their own doom. Meanwhile, behind the scenes of my perfect husband act, I was uncovering more financial dirt than I ever expected. I started going through our joint accounts with the kind of attention to detail that would make forensic accountants jealous, and what I found was basically a masterclass in financial infidelity. Juliana had been moving money around like she was training for the white-collar crime Olympics, making transfers that she thought were small enough that I wouldn't notice, but that added up to something pretty significant when you put them all together. The really damning part was that she'd opened a joint account with Brandon, which is such a monumentally stupid thing to do when you're planning to divorce your husband that I almost felt bad for her. Almost. This account had both their names on it, and over the past year, she'd transferred a total of $310,000 into it. $310,000. That's not hiding a little money for emergency fund money. That's planning to run away and start a new life money. Every time she said she was buying something for the house or donating to charity or investing in her business ventures, a chunk of that money was actually going into this secret account that she thought I'd never find. The cherry on top of this financial disaster Sunday was that Brandon had used his birthday as the password for their online banking. I'm not even kidding. His birthday. The same birthday that he posted about on Instagram every year with inspirational quotes about getting older and wiser, which was ironic considering he was getting older, but definitely not wiser. This is the same guy who once told me, and I quote, "You can't get viruses on iPhones, bro. That's just not how it works." Which is so confidently wrong that it wraps back around to being almost impressive. If confidence was intelligence, Brandon would be Einstein. But unfortunately for him, confidence is just confidence, and stupid is still stupid. I had access to everything now. Their messages about what they'd do with the money, their plans for buying a house together somewhere warm like Florida or California where they could start fresh. Brandon's detailed notes about how they'd invest my money into his business ventures, which appeared to consist of ideas he'd gotten from watching flip or flop reruns. There were spreadsheets, his spreadsheets, not mine, which was cute, showing projected returns on investments that didn't exist, business plans for companies that would never happen, and a budget for their future life together that was based on the assumption that they'd successfully take me for everything and I'd just roll over and let it happen. But here's where things got really interesting, where my investigation took a turn from catching an affair to uncovering a conspiracy. I found another sealed file, this one not on Juliana's laptop, but in her mother's email correspondence that Juliana had forwarded to herself years ago and forgotten about. This was the full story of that hit-and-run case from 1999, and it was so much worse than the initial file I'd found. The original police report that I'd seen before was just the tip of the iceberg. This email chain showed the entire cover-up in detail, like a how-to guide for destroying evidence and manipulating the legal system. Judge Margaret Walsh, back when she was just lawyer Margaret Walsh, had orchestrated the whole thing. The victim of the hit and run had been a college student walking home from a late-night study session, got hit by a car that fled the scene, ended up with serious injuries and permanent disability. The car was registered to the Walsh family, and initial witness statements suggested it had been driven by someone matching Edward Walsh's description, though the witnesses weren't entirely certain because it was dark and they'd only seen the vehicle for a few seconds. But instead of letting the investigation proceed normally, the Walsh family had gone into full damage control mode. They'd hired the most expensive lawyers they could find, the kind that specialize in making problems disappear for wealthy clients. Money had changed hands. Payments to witnesses who suddenly remembered things differently. Payments to police officers who lost certain pieces of evidence. Payments to the victim's family to settle quietly and seal all the records. The email chain showed Margaret discussing strategy with Edward, talking about how they needed to protect his political future, how this one mistake couldn't be allowed to derail everything they'd worked for. The really damning part was a message from Margaret to Edward that said, "The girl will be fine eventually, and even if she isn't, we've paid her family enough that they won't complain. Your career is more important than some random student's medical bills." The casual cruelty of it, the cold calculation that someone's lifelong disability was less important than a political career, was the kind of thing that ends dynasties when it goes public. I sat there reading these emails, these detailed confessions of corruption and obstruction of justice, and I realized I wasn't just holding evidence of an affair anymore. I was holding evidence of actual crimes, serious crimes, the kind that come with prison sentences and destroyed legacies. And the Walsh family had no idea this evidence existed outside their control, had no idea that their daughter had accidentally kept copies of everything, had no idea that those copies were now in the hands of the son-in-law they were about to betray. So I created new folders, made more backups, organized everything with timestamps and cross-references, and basically built a legal nuclear bomb that I could detonate whenever I wanted. The beauty of it was that I didn't even have to do anything illegal myself. I just had to be ready to hand over evidence of their illegal activities to the right people at the right time. I wasn't breaking the law. I was just really good at finding out when other people had broken it. And through all of this, I kept playing the perfect husband. I smiled at family dinners with the Walshes, made small talk with Senator Edward about his upcoming campaign, complimented Judge Margaret on her latest ruling, and the whole time I'm sitting there knowing that I could destroy all of them whenever I wanted. It was like playing poker with a royal flush while everyone else was bluffing with garbage hands, and the only hard part was not smiling too much and giving away that I knew I'd already won. Juliana would come home from her affairs, and I'd ask her about her day. Brandon would text her in front of me, and I'd pretend not to notice. Her parents would lecture me about responsibility and family values, and I'd nod along like I gave a damn about their opinions. The whole thing was performance art, and I was giving the performance of my life, letting them all dig themselves deeper while I just waited for the perfect moment to pull the trigger on everything I'd built. So here we are, back to where this whole story started. My 45th birthday, which was shaping up to be either the worst day of my life or the best day of my life, depending on how you looked at it. And honestly, I was leaning toward best because I'm the kind of person who finds satisfaction in well-executed revenge. The morning started normal enough, or at least as normal as any day can be when you know your wife is about to try to destroy your life. I woke up, made myself coffee because Juliana had mysteriously decided not to make me birthday breakfast, subtle, really subtle, and headed into the office like it was any other Wednesday. Except this Wednesday came with the knowledge that I was about to get legally ambushed, and I was more prepared for it than a doomsday prepper with a bunker full of canned goods. My office was decorated, which was actually kind of sweet. Sarah, my assistant who's basically the only person in my life who isn't actively trying to screw me over, had put up some balloons and one of those banner things that says "Happy Birthday" in letters that are always slightly crooked no matter how carefully you hang them. She'd brought in donuts from that fancy place downtown where they charge $6 per donut, because apparently adding sprinkles and calling something artisanal multiplies the price by 4. There was a card signed by everyone in the office, And for a brief moment, I felt kind of bad that they were all being nice to me on the same day. My personal life was about to explode like a fireworks factory. But then I remembered that I was about to win the biggest case of my career, my own divorce, and I felt better. The ambush came around 10:30 in the morning, right after I'd finished a conference call with a client who was worried about data breaches, which was ironic timing considering I was about to experience a marriage breach. Lawrence Trent walked into my office like he owned the place, wearing that cheap suit that I'd already mentally cataloged during our first encounter, and carrying his briefcase with the kind of self-important swagger that only lawyers and people who peaked in high school can pull off. He had this smile on his face, this smug little smirk that said he thought he was about to ruin my entire existence. And I could tell he'd been looking forward to this moment, probably practicing his lines in the mirror like some kind of discount villain from a legal drama that got canceled after one season. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, and there was that theatrical quality again, like he was announcing something at an awards show. "Happy birthday. I hope you're having a good morning, because I'm about to make your afternoon considerably more complicated." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the one I usually reserve for clients who are about to confess to corporate espionage, and watched him sit down with way too much confidence for someone wearing a tie that looked like it had been attacked by a printer running low on ink. "Please sit. Can I get you something? Coffee? Water? A better suit?" He didn't appreciate the joke, which was fine because it wasn't really for him. It was for me, and I was thoroughly entertained. He opened his briefcase with this dramatic flourish, like he was about to reveal the Holy Grail instead of just some paperwork, and pulled out a stack of documents that was honestly impressive in its thickness. This wasn't just divorce papers. This was a full legal assault, the kind of filing that probably took weeks to prepare and cost Juliana a fortune in legal fees, which was funny because the money she was using to pay for her divorce lawyer was technically our money, which meant I was partially funding my own legal destruction, which is the kind of irony that you can't make up. "Your wife, Juliana Walsh Reynolds, is filing for divorce," he announced, and I swear he paused for effect, waiting for me to react. When I didn't, when I just sat there with my hands folded on my desk looking mildly interested like he was telling me about the weather, I could see the confusion start to flicker across his face. This wasn't going how he'd planned. "She's seeking full custody of both minor children, Connor and Madison, citing your excessive work hours and emotional unavailability as reasons you're an unfit parent." That one stung a little, I'll admit, because my kids are the one thing in this whole mess that actually matters to me. But I kept my face neutral because showing emotion was exactly what he wanted. Let him think I didn't care. Let him underestimate me. That's when people make mistakes. "She's also requesting 70% of Reynolds' Risk Consulting," he continued, clearly warming up to his role now, getting into the rhythm of his prepared speech. "Given that the business was built during your marriage, she's entitled to significant ownership, and given her contributions to your success, hosting clients, managing your social calendar, representing the family at various events, we believe 70% is more than fair." I almost laughed at that one. 70%. For hosting dinner parties and showing up to galas in expensive dresses. The audacity was actually kind of impressive, like asking for the moon and expecting someone to just hand it over because you asked nicely, or in this case, because you hired a lawyer who could ask with official-looking paperwork. Additionally, and this is where Lawrence really leaned into his role, probably the high point of his entire legal career, she's requesting the primary residence, both vehicles registered in your name, and a monthly spousal support payment of $25,000 for the next 10 years. Which factors in the lifestyle she's become accustomed to and her limited earning potential due to focusing on family and charitable work during your marriage. He slid the documents across my desk like he was presenting evidence at a murder trial, and I glanced down at them without really reading them because I'd already known everything he was going to say. I'd seen drafts of these papers weeks ago when I'd hacked into her lawyer's email, which sounds illegal, but is actually just creative information gathering according to my own moral compass, and I'd been preparing my response ever since. "Impressive," I said, leaning back in my chair with what I hoped looked like casual indifference. "You rehearsed that whole speech, or does arrogance just come naturally to you?" His smile faltered for a second, and I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to figure out if I was joking, or if I was serious, or if maybe I was having some kind of breakdown that manifested as inappropriate humor. "Mr. Reynolds," I don't think you understand the seriousness of this situation. Your wife has a very strong case, and if you contest this, it's going to get ugly. For you. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said, opening my desk drawer, the same drawer where I prepared my counter-ambush, and pulling out that beautiful sealed envelope that I'd been looking forward to delivering for weeks now. It was heavier than his envelope, which was poetic in a way, because what I was about to do to his client was definitely heavier than what she was trying to do to me. But I don't think you understand, Lawrence. Can I call you Lawrence? Or do you prefer Larry? You look like a Larry. It's Mr. Trent, he said, and now he was getting annoyed, which was exactly where I wanted him. Sure, Mr. Trent. I slid the envelope across the desk, mirroring his earlier dramatic gesture. I need you to deliver this to your client. Today. As soon as possible. Actually, tell her it's my birthday present to her, and she should open it somewhere private, preferably with her parents present, because they're going to want to be there for what comes next. He picked up the envelope like it might explode, which in a metaphorical sense it absolutely was going to, and turned it over in his hands with this confused expression that suggested his brain was working overtime, trying to figure out what was happening. What is this? Just some light reading, I said, taking a sip of my now-cold coffee because I was committed to the casual act even though my heart was racing with adrenaline. Family history, old stories, that kind of thing. You know how families are. Everyone has secrets they'd rather keep buried. Unfortunately for your client and her family, I'm really good at digging things up. It's literally my job. Lawrence stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to decide if this was a bluff, if I was just trying to intimidate him with vague threats and mysterious envelopes, or if I actually had something real. The thing about lawyers like Lawrence is that they're used to dealing with emotional, reactive people who make threats they can't back up. So when they encounter someone who's calm and prepared, it throws them off their game. Mr. Reynolds, if you think you can intimidate my client with... I'm not intimidating anyone, I interrupted, and my voice was pleasant, almost cheerful. I'm just providing information. Public service, really. Your client and her family are very concerned about their reputation, their legacy, all that political dynasty stuff. And I thought they should know that someone has access to certain historical documents that might be of interest to, say, journalists, or federal investigators, or both. Now he looked worried, actually worried, and I could see the exact moment when he realized that maybe he'd walked into something bigger than a standard divorce case with a wealthy couple fighting over assets. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about something that could end careers and destroy families, and he was holding the evidence in his hands without even knowing what it was. Deliver the envelope, Larry, I said, standing up to signal that our meeting was over. And tell your client that if she wants to have a conversation about reasonable settlement terms instead of trying to take me for everything, my door is open. But if she wants to play hardball, if she wants to make this ugly, then that envelope is just the opening move. I've got a whole chess game planned out, and trust me, she doesn't want to see the end game. He left looking like he'd just been punched in the stomach, clutching that envelope like it was radioactive material, and I watched him walk out of my office with the kind of satisfaction that only comes from knowing you've just launched a counterattack that's going to hit like a freight train. I sat back down, finished my cold coffee, and checked my watch. Based on my calculations, accounting for drive time and the time it would take Juliana to actually open the envelope and read the contents, I estimated I had about 3 to 4 hours before my phone started exploding with panicked calls from the Walsh family. I was wrong. It only took 2.5 hours, and when those calls started coming in, when I saw Juliana's name flash across my screen followed by her mother's number, and then her father's, I let them all go to voicemail for the first round, because making powerful people wait is its own kind of satisfaction. By 6 p.m., I had 17 missed calls, 9 voicemails, and about 30 text messages ranging from angry to desperate to straight up begging. And that's when I finally poured myself that drink, put my feet up on my desk, and called back. The first call came in at exactly 3:47 p.m., which was actually earlier than I'd predicted, meaning either Juliana was a faster reader than I gave her credit for, or she'd taken one look at the documents and immediately understood just how screwed she was. I was in the middle of a meeting with a potential client, explaining how we could help track down whoever was leaking their product designs to competitors, when my phone started vibrating on my desk with that insistent buzz that means someone really needs to talk to you right now. I glanced down, saw a Juliana mobile flash across the screen, and silenced it with the kind of casual dismissal that probably would have enraged her if she'd been there to see it. The client didn't notice. Or if he did, he was polite enough not to mention it. And we continued discussing contract terms while my phone kept lighting up like a slot machine hitting jackpot. By the time the meeting ended 45 minutes later, I had 8 missed calls from Juliana, 3 from a number I didn't recognize but assumed was her trying to outsmart my screening by calling from somewhere else, and 2 from her mother's cell phone. The voicemails were piling up in my inbox like angry little time bombs waiting to explode, and I have to admit, I was really looking forward to listening to them, because there's something deeply satisfying about hearing powerful people lose their composure. But I didn't listen to them yet, because the game was just getting started, and I wanted to let them marinate in their panic for a little while longer, let them wonder if I was ignoring them or if I just hadn't seen the calls, let their imaginations run wild with worst-case scenarios. I made myself another coffee. The good stuff from the espresso machine in the break room, not the garbage from the office pot that tastes like it was brewed through an old gym sock, and settled back into my office to do some actual work. One of the benefits of running your own company is that you can pretty much set your own schedule, and if that schedule involves letting your soon-to-be ex-wife and her corrupt family sweat it out for a few hours while you catch up on emails, well, that's just good time management. Around 5:30, my assistant Sarah knocked on my door with that look she gets when she knows something's up, but is too professional to ask about it directly. "Mr. Reynolds, you've had several calls from your wife," she said. And I could tell she was trying to phrase it in a way that didn't sound judgmental, but also communicated that maybe I should probably call back because the calls were getting increasingly frantic. She said it was urgent. Family emergency urgent. "Thanks, Sarah," I said, giving her my best reassuring smile. "It's fine. Just some personal stuff we're working through. Nothing to worry about." She nodded and left, but I could see the concern in her eyes because Sarah's worked for me for 5 years, and she's developed this sixth sense about when things are going sideways in my personal life, which is actually pretty often considering my personal life has been a disaster for the past few years. The difference was that this time, this particular disaster was entirely under my control and going exactly according to plan. At 6 p.m. sharp, I finally decided it was time to start returning calls. I poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey from the bottle I keep in my desk, 18-year-old single malt that costs more than most people's car payments. Because if you're going to destroy your wife's family dynasty, you might as well do it with class, and dialed Juliana's number. She picked up before the first ring finished, which told me she'd been sitting there with her phone in her hand, staring at it like it might spontaneously combust. "Carter," she said, and her voice was already shaking, already on the edge of tears or rage or both. "What did you do? What the hell did you do?" I took a slow sip of whiskey, let it burn down my throat, and said in the most casual voice I could manage, "Technically, nothing illegal. I just provided some historical documentation that I thought you and your family might want to review. Happy birthday to me, by the way. Thanks for asking." "This isn't funny," she said, and now she was definitely crying. I could hear it in the way her voice was breaking. "You can't do this. You can't just... Carter, please, we need to talk about this." "Oh, now you want to talk," I said, and I couldn't keep the sarcasm out of my voice even if I'd wanted to. "That's interesting. This morning you wanted to take my kids, my business, and basically everything I've ever worked for. But now suddenly we need to have a conversation? What changed, Juliana? Did you finally read the part about the hit-and-run cover-up? Or was it the financial records showing the bribes? I'm curious which part upset you most." There was silence on the other end, just breathing and what sounded like someone else in the background. Probably her mother or father, maybe both, all huddled around speakerphone having a crisis meeting in whatever room they thought was safe from listening devices. Little did they know that I didn't need listening devices. They documented their own crimes so thoroughly that I just had to organize the evidence. "We can work this out," she finally said, and her voice had shifted from panic to calculating, which meant she was trying to negotiate now, trying to find an angle that would make this go away. "Whatever you want, we can figure something out. Just please don't." "Don't what?" I interrupted. "Don't tell the truth? Don't share historical facts with people who might be interested in them?" "Juliana, I'm not doing anything. Yet. I'm just sitting here in my office, drinking expensive whiskey on my birthday, thinking about my options." "Carter, please." I hung up, not in an angry slam the phone down way, just a simple press of the end call button, Because sometimes the most devastating thing you can do is just stop talking. Let them sit with that silence. Let them wonder what I'm planning. Let them panic about all the ways this could blow up in their faces. The second call came 3 minutes later, and this time it was Judge Margaret Walsh herself. Using her, "I'm a serious authority figure," voice that probably works great in courtrooms, but wasn't going to work on me. I let it ring 4 times before answering, just to be petty about it. "Carter," she said, skipping all the pleasantries and going straight to business. "How did you find those files?" "They were sealed. Legally sealed. You had no right to access them." "I read," I said simply. "You should try it sometime. Very educational. You learn all sorts of interesting things, like how political families sometimes cover up serious crimes to protect their careers. Real page-turner material. Those files are protected." "Were protected," I corrected. Past tense. See, the thing about digital files is that they're really hard to actually destroy. You can seal them legally, you can hide them, you can pretend they don't exist, but somewhere, somehow, there's always a copy floating around. In this case, that copy ended up on your daughter's laptop, and she very helpfully forwarded it to herself via email years ago, probably for insurance purposes. Smart move, actually. Just unfortunate for you that I'm married to her, and I know how to recover deleted files. I could practically hear her blood pressure spiking through the phone. "You can't use those files. They're inadmissible. They're protected by attorney-client privilege." "In court, maybe," I said, swirling my whiskey and enjoying the way the light caught it. "But I'm not planning to take you to court, Margaret. I'm planning to take you to the court of public opinion, which has much looser rules about admissibility." CNN would have a field day with this story. Prominent judge and senator covered up hit and run 25 years ago, bribed witnesses, falsified police reports. I bet they could stretch that into a week-long special report, maybe get one of those investigative journalism awards. Very prestigious. "You wouldn't dare," she said. But her voice was wavering now, the authority figure mask slipping to reveal the scared woman underneath. "Wouldn't I?" I asked. "See, here's the thing. This morning, your daughter tried to take my children away from me. She tried to destroy my business, take my assets, and basically ruin my life. Over an affair with a personal trainer who can't spell dumbbell, which is actually kind of impressive in how stupid it is. So yeah, I would absolutely dare. I would dare with enthusiasm and a smile on my face." The third call came an hour later, after I'd let both Juliana and her mother stew in their panic for a while. And this time it was Senator Edward Walsh himself, using his carefully cultivated man-of-the-people voice that he probably practiced in the mirror before campaign speeches. He tried the friendly approach first, calling me son, like we were buddies having a casual chat instead of enemies in the middle of a war. "Carter, son, I think there's been a misunderstanding here," he started, and I could picture him in his study, probably wearing one of those cardigan sweaters that politicians wear when they want to look relatable and trustworthy. "Whatever my daughter did, whatever mistakes were made, I'm sure we can work this out like reasonable people. Family shouldn't fight like this." "We're not family, Edward," I said, deliberately using his first name instead of Senator because I knew it would annoy him. "We were family when it was convenient for you, when you could use me for photo ops and claim that your daughter married a successful businessman. But the moment Juliana decided to trade me in for a newer model, the moment you all decided to destroy me, that family connection ended. You made this personal, so don't act surprised when I respond personally. You don't want to make enemies in Washington, son," he said, and now the friendly mask was slipping, revealing the politician underneath who was used to getting his way through implied threats. "I have friends in very high places, and I have evidence of multiple felonies that you committed," I interrupted. "So let's talk about who has more leverage here. Your friends in high places? They'll abandon you the second this story breaks, because politicians are like rats on a sinking ship. They only stick around when things are good. The moment you become a liability, the moment your scandal threatens to splash back on them, they'll be writing press releases about how they barely knew you." There was a long silence, and I could hear him breathing heavily, probably trying to control his anger. Senator Edward Walsh was not used to being talked to like this, was not used to someone treating him like he was anything other than powerful and important, and the cognitive dissonance was probably giving him a headache. "What do you want?" he finally asked, and his voice was flat now, defeated, like a poker player who just realized he was holding nothing while the other guy had a royal flush. "Oh, I already have, Senator, I said, finishing my whiskey in one satisfying gulp. You're just cheaper to destroy. I hung up on him too, because apparently I was in a hanging up on people mood, and sat back in my chair feeling more satisfied than I had in years. My phone kept buzzing with incoming calls and texts, a never-ending stream of panic and desperation from the Walsh family, as they slowly realized that they'd declared war on the wrong person. Lawrence Trent, Juliana's lawyer, called twice trying to negotiate and discuss settlement options, which was lawyer speak for, please don't destroy my client, because that would also destroy my reputation. By 8 p.m., I had 23 missed calls, 14 voicemails, and 47 text messages ranging from threats to pleas to offers of various settlements that got progressively more desperate as the evening went on. I didn't respond to any of them. Within 48 hours of my birthday ambush, the entire Walsh family empire started crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. And honestly, it was beautiful to watch in that schadenfreude kind of way where you know you probably shouldn't enjoy someone else's misery, but you absolutely do anyway. Judge Margaret Walsh announced her retirement for health reasons on Thursday morning, which everyone with half a brain knew was code for, I'm getting out before the scandal breaks. And by Thursday afternoon, Senator Edward Walsh had canceled his re-election campaign with some vague statement about spending more time with family that fooled absolutely nobody in political circles. Brandon, my wife's brilliant personal trainer boyfriend, deleted his entire Instagram account sometime around midnight on Wednesday, which was honestly the biggest tragedy of this whole situation because I'd been really enjoying watching his motivational quotes and shirtless selfies knowing that his whole life was about to implode. The guy went from posting daily inspiration about living your best life to completely disappearing from social media, probably because he'd finally figured out that being the other man in a divorce case involving political corruption and federal crimes wasn't actually the flex he thought it was. Now I spend my evenings doing something I never thought I'd get to do again, being an actual dad instead of just the guy who pays for stuff and gets ignored. Connor and Madison are back living with me full-time, and we've developed this routine where I make pancakes every Saturday morning while they tell me about their week. And honestly, it's the most normal thing in my life, and I love it more than any business deal I've ever closed. Connor's reading college-level physics books now and asking me questions I have to Google to answer, and Madison started calling me the best dad ever, which I'm pretty sure she says to get extra dessert, but I'll take it anyway. Do I regret anything? Only that I didn't install security cameras sooner, because I would have paid good money to watch Brandon try to explain to Juliana why his real estate expertise somehow required them to meet exclusively in hotel rooms with room service. That conversation probably would have been comedy gold, the kind of awkward fumbling explanation that would make a great YouTube compilation if anyone had filmed it. Maybe try getting a real job like normal people, my wife's dad said at the family brunch. Stop this consulting nonsense. I smiled politely. Monday morning, his CEO called him in. Corporate is restructuring. You'll meet the new owner today. I walked into his conference room. Look, I've survived a lot of things in my 32 years on this planet. College finals fueled entirely by Red Bull and spite. A cross-country road trip with a broken AC in August. That time I accidentally replied all to a company email calling the CEO's strategy aggressively stupid. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the unique form of psychological warfare known as Sunday brunch with my wife's family. Picture this. It's 11 a.m. on a gorgeous Sunday morning. Normal people are sleeping off hangovers, binge-watching true crime documentaries, or doing literally anything that doesn't involve voluntary suffering. But me? I'm sitting at the Ivy Garden, because of course it's called something pretentious like that, watching my father-in-law Gerald Baxter treat a mimosa like it's a prop in his one-man show titled Disappointment, A Father-in-Law's Perspective. Gerald's one of those guys who peaked in 1997 and never quite got the memo that the world moved on. You know the type. Thinks wearing a Rolex makes him Warren Buffett, refers to his golf handicap in casual conversation, and genuinely believes synergy is still a cool thing to say in meetings. He's got that whole regional director energy, which basically means he's important enough to be insufferable, but not important enough for anyone to actually care. Maybe try getting a real job like normal people, he announced, loud enough that I swear the hostess 3 tables over paused mid-pour. His voice had that performative quality of someone who desperately needs strangers to validate his opinions. Stop this consulting nonsense. Ah yes, the consulting nonsense. My favorite topic. Right up there with root canals and Twitter discourse. I felt Clara's heel connect with my shin under the table. Our secret marital Morse code for please don't make this worse. Her sister Lindsay, bless her heart, giggled into her mimosa like she'd been waiting all week for Dad to roast me. She probably had. Lindsay's the type who gets genuine entertainment from other people's discomfort. She's like if Schadenfreude became a person and then got a Pinterest account. Consulting, Gerald continued, because why stop when you're on a roll, is just code for unemployed but good at PowerPoint. He leaned back in his chair with the satisfied smile of a man who thinks he just dropped the mic on a TED Talk stage. I reached for the butter with the calm of a Buddhist monk who'd achieved enlightenment, or at least the calm of a guy who'd already bought his father-in-law's company and was just waiting for the right moment to drop that particular truth bomb. Literally bought it. Signed papers, wire transfers, the whole 9 yards. But Gerald didn't know that yet, and that made every second of this brunch absolutely worth it. You know what they say about consultants, Gerald? I replied, spreading butter on my toast with surgical precision. We're just people who borrow your watch to tell you what time it is, then keep the watch. I took a bite. But hey, at least we're honest about it. Clara's mother, Patricia, made that disapproving TSK sound that mothers-in-law have somehow trademarked. She's the type of woman who says, bless your heart, but means, I hope you step on a Lego. She was wearing pearls, actual pearls, at brunch. Who does that? People who think Downton Abbey is a documentary. That's who. Leo makes good money consulting. Clara offered weakly, trying to throw me a life raft in this sea of family judgment. Money isn't everything, sweetheart, Gerald said, patting Clara's hand like she was 6 years old and had just suggested she wanted to be a princess when she grew up. Stability is. Benefits. A 401k. Things real professionals have. If sarcasm burned calories, I'd have been in Olympic shape at that moment. I could have competed in the sarcasm decathlon and taken home gold. But I just smiled and nodded, letting Gerald enjoy his moment. Let him have his little victory lap. Let him feel like the big man at the table, dispensing career advice to the disappointing son-in-law who just couldn't seem to get his act together. My brother-in-law Derek, Lindsay's husband, sat there nodding along like one of those bobblehead dolls you see in car windows. Derek works in insurance and thinks talking about actuarial tables is riveting conversation. He's about as exciting as watching paint dry in slow motion, but at least he's consistent. You know exactly what you're getting with Derek, a guy who peaked when he made regional sales manager and has been dining out on that achievement for 7 years. I'm just saying, Gerald continued, because apparently we weren't done here. At your age, you should have something to show for yourself. A title, a desk, business cards that don't say consultant like it's a dirty word. I took a sip of my coffee, overpriced, pretentious coffee that probably had a backstory about fair trade beans harvested by monks in Guatemala, and smiled. You're absolutely right, Gerald. I should really step up my game. Clara shot me a look that said, what are you planning? She knows me too well. 6 years of marriage will do that. She can read my expressions like a book, and right now I was apparently broadcasting, I'm up to something, in neon letters. The waiter appeared with our entrees, and I watched Gerald cut into his eggs Benedict like he was performing surgery. Everything this man does is calculated for maximum performance value. He probably practices eating in front of a mirror to make sure he looks sufficiently executive-like while chewing. You know what your problem is, Leo? Gerald asked, because apparently rhetorical questions are his love language. You don't take things seriously enough. Business is serious. Career building is serious. You can't just float from client to client, making PowerPoints and calling it a living. You're right. I agreed, reaching for the pepper. I should definitely find something more substantial, more permanent. Maybe even take over a company or something. Really commit, you know? Lindsay snorted. Patricia's pearls practically clutched themselves. Derek bobblehead some more. And Clara's foot found my shin again, harder this time. But Gerald? Gerald just nodded sagely, completely missing the joke. Now you're talking sense. That's the kind of ambition I like to hear. Maybe there's hope for you yet. I buttered another piece of toast and let him have his moment of misplaced pride. Tomorrow morning was going to be spectacular. Tomorrow morning, Gerald Baxter was going to walk into his office at Baxter Industries, straighten his tie, pour his coffee, and prepare for another day of Regional Director ING. And then he was going to meet his new boss. Me, the consultant, the PowerPoint guy, the disappointing son-in-law who couldn't get a real job. I was going to own his company, his literal, actual company. And he had absolutely no idea. If Karma had a gift shop, I'd just maxed out my rewards card. More mimosas, anyone? The waiter asked brightly. Yes, I said, raising my glass. I'm celebrating. Celebrating what? Patricia asked suspiciously. I smiled. Sunday. Beautiful Sunday. Nothing more. Tomorrow, though? Tomorrow I'd be celebrating justice. Sweet, perfectly timed, absolutely delicious justice. But for now, I'd just sit here, eat my overpriced eggs, and watch Gerald perform his greatest hit. I'm important, and you're not, a musical. The encore was going to be legendary. So here's the thing about Gerald Baxter that you need to understand. The man doesn't know when to quit. It's like he's got some internal alarm that goes off every 5 minutes reminding him to say something condescending. Most people would land one good insult at brunch and call it a day, maybe save some ammunition for Thanksgiving. Not Gerald. Gerald approaches family gatherings like he's training for the Judgment Olympics. And today, he was going for gold. He leaned in across the table with that look. You know the one, where older guys think they're about to drop some serious wisdom on you. That, I'm going to change your life with this advice, son energy. Except he wasn't my dad. Thank God. And the only thing he was about to change was my opinion of how much patience I actually had. The smell hit me first. A cologne that I'm pretty sure was discontinued when people still thought Blockbuster would make a comeback. It was aggressive, this cologne. The kind that walks into a room 5 minutes before the person wearing it does. Mixed with that particular brand of overconfidence that only comes from being moderately successful in middle management for 20 years, Gerald was basically a walking time capsule of 1998's worst decisions. You know, Leo, he said, and I already knew this was going to be good. Any sentence that starts with you know, Leo from Gerald is basically a guarantee that I'm about to get lectured. When I was your age, I had a corner office, a company car, and real stock options. Real stock options. He said it like he was describing the Holy Grail. Like having stock options in a pharmaceutical company that specialized in questionable pain management solutions was the pinnacle of human achievement. I half expected him to start describing his 401k match like it was a romantic sonnet. Yeah, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly pleasant. And rotary phones too, right? Good times. I took a sip of my coffee. Bet you had to walk uphill both ways to the office too. In the snow. Barefoot. The table went silent. Like, you could hear the ambient jazz music from the restaurant speakers kind of silent. The kind of silence that happens in movies right before someone throws a punch or declares their undying love. Patricia's fork stopped midair, a piece of cantaloupe trembling on the tines. Lindsay's eyes went wide with that mix of horror and delight that only comes from watching someone else get in trouble. And Derek? Poor Derek looked like he was watching a car accident in slow motion and couldn't decide whether to look away or grab popcorn. My brother-in-law actually snorted into his pancakes. Literal snort. Syrup went up his nose, and he started coughing while trying not to laugh. Lindsay smacked his shoulder, but even she was fighting a smile. There's something universally satisfying about watching someone poke the bear, even if that bear is your own father-in-law, and the poker is your sister's husband, who really should know better. Gerald recovered faster than I expected. Give him credit. The man's had practiced dealing with people who don't automatically bow to his wisdom. Probably from decades of middle management meetings where someone occasionally had the audacity to question his quarterly projections. You can laugh, he said, straightening his tie like that somehow gave him authority. But men with real jobs have stability. Responsibility. You can't keep floating from client to client pretending to be important. Pretending to be important. Man, that one landed exactly how he wanted it to. The table shifted uncomfortably. Clara's hand found mine under the table, squeezing it in that way that meant both, I love you, and please God don't make this worse. Patricia made a sound that was half gasp, half vindication, like Gerald had just scored the winning point in a debate she'd been having with herself about whether I was worthy of her daughter. But here's what Gerald didn't know, what none of them knew sitting at that table with their mimosas and their judgment. I wasn't pretending anything. I was the real deal. I just happened to be the real deal in a way that didn't fit Gerald's 1990s corporate playbook of success. Oh, I'm not pretending, I said, meeting his eyes with the kind of calm that comes from having an absolutely nuclear secret in your back pocket. I charge per hour for being important. Big difference. I picked up my water glass. See, when you're actually important, people pay you just to show up. When you pretend to be important, you get a corner office and a nameplate. Different leagues, Gerald. Clara whispered urgently next to me. Leo, please. Her voice had that edge of desperation mixed with amusement. 6 years together means she knows exactly when I'm about to go from playful sarcasm to nuclear warfare. We were currently at DEFCON 3 and climbing. I turned to her and winked, just trying to live up to the family standard of humility. Lindsay actually laughed out loud at that one. She tried to cover it with a cough, but it came out like a seal barking. Patricia shot her a look that could have frozen lava, but the damage was done. Even Derek was grinning into his coffee cup like he'd just witnessed the most exciting thing to happen at a family brunch since Uncle Ted got drunk and told everyone his real opinion about the Electoral College. Gerald's face was doing something interesting. It cycled through several shades of red, like a mood ring having an existential crisis. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For a beautiful moment, I thought he might actually let it go. Maybe pack up his ego and retreat to fight another day. But no, this is Gerald we're talking about. The man who once spent 45 minutes at Christmas dinner explaining why his fantasy football strategy was applicable to real business management. Quitting isn't in his vocabulary. Probably because it would require admitting defeat, and Gerald Baxter doesn't admit defeat. He just reframes it as a learning opportunity and moves on. The difference between you and me, Leo, he said, leaning back in his chair with renewed confidence, is that I built something. I climbed the ladder. I earned respect in my industry. What have you built? A roster of clients who might drop you the second someone cheaper comes along. It was a good shot, I'll give him that. Aimed right at the insecurity that every consultant secretly carries around like a backpack full of rocks. Are we really valuable? Or are we just expensive band-aids? Do we actually solve problems? Or do we just make PowerPoints about solving problems while the real workers do the actual work? But the thing is, I'd stopped worrying about that question about 6 months ago. Right around the time my firm started acquiring companies instead of just advising them. Right around the time we'd built up enough capital and credibility to go from consultants to actual owners. Right around the time we'd signed the papers on Baxter Industries. You're absolutely right, Gerald, I said, and I meant it. Sort of. You built something impressive. Really, genuinely impressive. I paused, letting the sincerity sink in. And I'm looking forward to seeing how all that hard work translates now that there's new ownership. It was subtle. So subtle that it flew right over his head like a paper airplane in a hurricane. Clara caught it, though. I felt her hand tighten on mine, and when I glanced at her, her eyes were wide with the realization of what I'd just said. She mouthed no at me, but she was smiling. That's love, right there. Being married to someone who simultaneously wants to murder you and high-five you. Gerald just nodded, completely missing the subtext. Well, at least you can admit when someone's more successful than you. That's growth, Leo. Real growth. Oh, I'm growing all the time, I said cheerfully. In fact, I'd say my career is expanding faster than I ever imagined. It's really quite exciting. Lindsay was looking at me suspiciously now. She's sharper than she lets on, my sister-in-law. Plays the ditzy socialite role well, but there's a brain behind all that hair product and Instagram filtering. Why do you look so happy about this? She asked. Dad's literally roasting you, and you're smiling like you won the lottery. Maybe I just appreciate family bonding time, I said innocently. These moments are precious. We should treasure them. Derek looked confused. Patricia looked suspicious. Clara looked terrified and delighted in equal measure. And Gerald? Gerald looked satisfied. Like he'd completed his Sunday morning mission of reminding everyone at the table why he was the successful one and I was just the consultant who married well. The waiter brought the check, and Gerald grabbed it with the flourish of a man making a point. I've got this, he announced. Least I can do since consulting probably doesn't come with an expense account. That's very generous, Gerald, I said. Thank you. He smiled. Victorious. Satisfied. Completely unaware that in less than 24 hours, he'd be eating those words with a side of humble pie and a garnish of karma. I stood up, helped Clara with her chair, and prepared to leave the ivy garden with my dignity intact and my secret still safely tucked away. Tomorrow morning couldn't come fast enough. If you've never had the pleasure of watching a middle-aged man peacock about his corporate achievements while Eggs Benedict slowly congeals on his plate, let me tell you, you're not missing much. But Gerald Baxter didn't just peacock. Oh no, Gerald full-on strutted, preened, and practically molted his corporate feathers all over the brunch table like he was auditioning for a nature documentary titled Mediocre White Guys in Their Natural Habitat. Brunch was dragging on like a movie that should have ended 30 minutes ago, but the director kept adding unnecessary scenes. You know that feeling when you're watching something and you check your watch thinking, surely we're near the end, and then you realize you're only halfway through? Yeah, that was this brunch. Time had become meaningless. I was pretty sure we'd entered some kind of temporal vortex where Gerald's voice was the only constant in the universe. Let me tell you about real business, Gerald announced, because apparently we weren't done here. The check had been paid. The waiter had cleared our plates. Normal people would have taken this as a sign that it was time to leave, maybe go enjoy what was left of their Sunday. But Gerald Baxter wasn't normal people. He was a man with stories to tell and a captive audience that was too polite to fake a medical emergency and flee. He adjusted his collar. I swear this man adjusts his collar more than a Regency romance character, and launched into what I can only describe as a TED Talk nobody asked for. Baxter Industries isn't just a company. It's a legacy. We move products, not PowerPoints. There it was again. The PowerPoint dig. If I had $1 for every time someone took a shot at consultants and PowerPoint, I could retire tomorrow. Which, coincidentally, I basically could anyway, but that's beside the point. Real business, he continued, warming to his subject like a preacher who just found his rhythm, is about tangible results. We manufacture solutions. We distribute hope. We're in the pharmaceutical industry, for God's sake. We help people. I took a sip of my water to avoid saying what I was actually thinking, which was something along the lines of, yeah, you help people get addicted to opioids, but sure, let's call it hope. Clara's hand was still on mine under the table, probably to prevent me from launching into the takedown I had mentally prepared. It was a good takedown too. Had statistics and everything. I'd done my homework when we were acquiring the company, and let me tell you, Baxter Industries' track record was more checkered than a NASCAR flag. Right? I said instead, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Real business. Making real products. Very tangible. I paused just long enough to be dangerous. Mainly opioids, from what I read. You know that sound a record makes when it scratches to a stop in a movie? That's what happened to the conversation. Gerald's face went through more color changes than a sunset. Patricia clutched her pearls, again, because apparently that's just her default response to anything uncomfortable. Lindsay's mouth fell open in that delighted shock of someone watching drama unfold that doesn't directly involve them. And Derek? Derek looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair and possibly never emerge. Gerald choked on his eggs. Literally choked. Started coughing and sputtering like a cartoon character who just swallowed wrong. Patricia reached over to pat his back, while shooting me a look that could have curdled milk. Clara's grip on my hand tightened to the point where I was losing circulation, but honestly, it was worth it. They're legitimate pain management solutions. Gerald finally managed to sputter out, his face now approximately the color of a fire hydrant. FDA approved. Prescribed by doctors. Yeah, I muttered, just loud enough for the table to hear. And French fries are technically vegetables. Doesn't mean we should pretend they're health food. Patricia actually gasped. Like, hand over heart, scandalized Southern Belle gasped. Leo Martins, that is incredibly inappropriate. Gerald's company helps thousands of people manage chronic pain. And addicts thousands more. But hey, at least the profit margins are solid. I said cheerfully, reaching for my coffee cup. That's real business right there. Can't argue with the numbers. Listen, I'm not usually this confrontational. Okay, that's a lie. I'm frequently this confrontational. But usually I have the good sense to keep my mouth shut at family gatherings. The secret to a happy marriage is knowing when to bite your tongue and when to let your sarcasm fly free. Today, apparently, my filter had clocked out early. Probably because it knew what was coming tomorrow and figured I'd earned the right to have a little fun. Gerald was making that face that people make when they're trying to decide between defending their honor or maintaining their dignity. You can't really do both simultaneously, and watching him try was like watching someone juggle while riding a unicycle. Impressive in its own way, but ultimately doomed to fail. The pharmaceutical industry is heavily regulated, he said stiffly, falling back on corporate speak like it was a security blanket. We follow all FDA guidelines. We have compliance officers. We do everything by the book. Which book? I asked innocently. The one with all the loopholes highlighted? Clara whispered urgently next to me. Leo, please. But I could hear the smile in her voice. That's how I knew I wasn't in real trouble. When your wife is trying not to laugh while begging you to stop, you're in that sweet spot of acceptable mischief. Lindsay leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with the kind of glee that only comes from watching family drama that doesn't center on you for once. I mean, he's not wrong, Dad. Didn't you guys just settle that lawsuit about the marketing practices? Oh, Lindsay. Beautiful, occasionally useful Lindsay. She'd just lobbed a grenade into the conversation, and I hadn't even asked her to. Sometimes the universe just hands you gifts. Gerald's eye twitched. Actual twitched. That was a nuisance settlement. No admission of wrongdoing. Standard corporate practice. Right, because innocent companies settle for millions of dollars all the time, I said. Totally standard. Happens every day. Like getting coffee, except the coffee costs 8 figures and comes with a gag order. This is highly inappropriate dinner conversation, Patricia announced, because when you can't win the argument, you attack the premise of having the argument in the first place. Classic move. I respected it, even if I wasn't going to honor it. It's brunch, Mom, Lindsay corrected. And honestly, it's the most interesting brunch we've had in years. Usually, Dad just talks about golf and Derek falls asleep with his eyes open. Derek made a noise of protest, but even he couldn't really argue with that assessment. Gerald stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with that awful sound that makes everyone in a restaurant turn to look. I think we're done here, he announced with as much dignity as a man who'd just been roasted by his son-in-law and daughter simultaneously could muster. Thank you all for coming. Leo, always a pleasure. The way he said pleasure made it clear it was anything but. It was the verbal equivalent of a middle finger wrapped in corporate politeness. The pleasure's all mine, Gerald, I said, standing up to shake his hand. Really, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this. Educational, even. He gripped my hand harder than necessary, trying to establish dominance through handshake strength like we were silverback gorillas in suits. I squeezed back just enough to make it interesting, but not enough to turn it into an actual competition. There's an art to the passive-aggressive handshake, and both of us had clearly mastered it. As we all gathered our things and prepared to leave the Ivy Garden, Gerald pulled on his jacket. Designer, obviously, with that little logo that screams, I paid too much for this, and straightened his shoulders. You know, Leo, maybe one day you'll understand what it means to build something that matters. To have a real impact. I smiled. The kind of smile that probably looked friendly from the outside, but was hiding about 17 layers of irony on the inside. You know what, Gerald? I think I'm starting to understand it better than you'd believe. In fact, I'd say my understanding is growing exponentially. Day by day, hour by hour. He nodded, completely missing the subtext again. The man was batting zero on picking up what I was putting down, and honestly, it made tomorrow's reveal even more delicious. Clara linked her arm through mine as we walked toward the parking lot, and she leaned in to whisper, You're terrible. Terribly charming, I corrected. Terribly smug. Can I be both? She laughed, and that laugh told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't mad. She was entertained. And maybe, just maybe, she was a little bit proud that I'd held my ground against her father's corporate peacocking. As we got into the car and Gerald's BMW pulled out of the parking lot ahead of us, I watched him drive away with the satisfaction of someone who knew exactly what Monday morning held in store. Let him have his Sunday. Let him go home and tell Patricia all about his disappointing son-in-law who just doesn't understand real business. Let him feel superior for one more day. Because tomorrow, Gerald Baxter was going to learn exactly what I'd built. And it was going to be glorious. That evening, I sat in our living room pretending to watch whatever documentary Clara had put on. Something about penguins, maybe? Or was it volcanoes? Honestly, I couldn't tell you if my life depended on it. My mind was about 48 hours ahead, playing out tomorrow morning's scene like a movie director obsessing over the perfect shot. Meanwhile, somewhere across town, Gerald was probably re-watching golf highlights and congratulating himself on another successful mentoring session with his disappointing son-in-law. The mental image of Gerald in his man cave, because of course he has a man cave, complete with a vintage bar cart and framed photos of himself shaking hands with minor pharmaceutical industry executives, was almost too perfect. I could see him there, loosening his tie, pouring himself a bourbon that cost more than it should, and telling Patricia all about how he'd really given me some hard truths today. How someone needed to tell me how the real world works. How consulting was a dead end and I needed to face reality. Little did he know that reality was about to face him. Like a freight train, made of karma and irony. A karma and irony freight train, if you will. Clara was curled up next to me on the couch, her feet tucked under a blanket, watching the penguins or volcanoes or whatever with actual interest. She's good like that. Actually present in the moment instead of mentally rehearsing corporate takeover reveals like some kind of business revenge fantasist. Which is definitely not what I was doing. Definitely not. You're smiling at your phone, she observed without looking away from the TV. You only smile at your phone like that when something's about to happen. I smile at my phone all the time, I protested. I could be looking at memes. Dogs doing funny things. The usual internet stuff. You're looking at your email. I can see the reflection in your glasses. Damn. Caught. This is what happens when you marry someone smart. They notice things. Like email reflections. And the fact that you've been mentally checked out of Penguin Documentary Hour for the past 20 minutes. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I definitely didn't do a terrible job of hiding my reaction. Clara turned to look at me fully now, one eyebrow raised in that way that said, I know you're up to something, and you're going to tell me what it is right now, or I'm going to withhold dessert for a week. It was a text from Marcus and Gwen, my business partner, and the reason Stratton Advisory Group had gone from scrappy consulting firm to consulting firm that occasionally buys entire companies for fun and profit. Marcus is one of those guys who's somehow simultaneously laid back and intensely driven. Like a shark that does yoga. He's brilliant with numbers, ruthless with negotiations, and has a sense of humor dry enough to make the Sahara look like a water park. The text read, contract signed. Full acquisition of Baxter Industries confirmed. Board meeting Monday, 9 a.m. You lead. I grinned so hard that even our dog, Pepper, a golden retriever with more enthusiasm than brain cells, looked up from her bed in the corner with concern. Her tail did that questioning half-wag that dogs do when they're not sure if they should be excited or worried. I felt you, Pepper. I felt you. Okay, what? Clara demanded, setting down her wine glass with the deliberate care of someone preparing for important information. What's happening? You look like you just won the lottery, inherited a castle, and found out pizza has negative calories all at the same time. Remember how your dad spent all of brunch telling me to get a real job? I asked, unable to keep the grin off my face. Vividly. I'm pretty sure the entire restaurant remembers. He wasn't exactly subtle. And remember how he kept going on about real business and building legacies, and how consulting is just expensive PowerPoints. Clara nodded slowly, and I could see the gears turning in her head. She's quick, my wife. Always has been. It's one of the things I love about her. She can follow a conversational thread to its logical conclusion faster than most people can follow a GPS. Leo, she said carefully, what did you do? Technically, I didn't do anything. Marcus and I, along with our team of incredibly talented professionals, engaged in a legitimate business acquisition that was months in the making and involved extensive due diligence, legal review, and financial analysis. Leo, we bought your dad's company. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens right before something either very good or very bad occurs. Like in movies when the music stops and you're not sure if the next scene is going to be a celebration or an explosion. Clara just stared at me, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips, her eyes wide enough that I could see the full spectrum of emotions cycling through. Shock, disbelief, dawning realization, horror, and then, slowly, inevitably, the corners of her mouth started to twitch. You bought Baxter Industries, she said flatly. Controlling interest, yes. Stratton Advisory Group is now the majority shareholder. My father's company. Technically your grandfather's company that your father works for. But yes, that one. The company he spent all day bragging about. The very same. The company he used as evidence that you don't understand real business. Bingo. Clara set down her wine glass and pressed both hands to her face. For a second, I couldn't tell if she was about to yell at me or laugh. Possibly both. Marriage is all about embracing those uncertain moments. Then she started laughing. Not polite laughter. Not restrained laughter. Full on, doubled over, tears starting to form laughter. The kind of laughter that makes the dog jump up excitedly, because clearly something amazing is happening and she wants in on it. Pepper trotted over, tail wagging at full speed, ready to participate in whatever joy was occurring. "Oh my God," Clara gasped between laughs. "Oh my God, Leo. You sat there. You sat there through all of it. The corner office speech. The stock options lecture. The get a real job sermon. And you already owned his company." To be fair, the paperwork was still being finalized. We only got the final signatures this afternoon. Does he know? Nope. Board meeting tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. I believe the agenda includes meet your new overlords and discuss restructuring plans. She collapsed back into the couch, still giggling. He's going to die? Actually die? We're going to have to plan a funeral because his ego can't survive this. I prefer to think of it as a learning opportunity, I said primly. Character building. A chance for personal growth. You're terrible. I'm efficient. There's a difference. Clara grabbed her phone and started texting rapidly. I leaned over to see who she was messaging and caught the words, "You will not believe," before she angled the screen away from me. "Who are you telling?" I asked. "Lindsay. She deserves to know. She sat through that brunch too." "What are you saying?" "That she needs to clear her schedule for tomorrow evening because we're going to need an emergency sister debrief session with wine. Lots of wine." My phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. "I assume you haven't told your father-in-law yet." I typed back. "He thinks I'm unemployed but good at PowerPoint." Marcus's response was immediate. "This is going to be the best Monday in corporate history. I'm bringing popcorn to the board meeting." "Please don't bring popcorn to the board meeting." "Fine. But I'm bringing the energy of someone who has popcorn." I smiled and pocketed my phone. Marcus was right. Tomorrow was going to be legendary. The kind of story that gets told at business school reunions and industry conferences. The kind of revenge that was so perfectly timed, so absolutely poetic, that you couldn't have scripted it better if you tried. Clara was still texting with Lindsay, and I could hear the notification sounds of rapid-fire responses. Knowing Lindsay, she was probably already planning what to wear to tomorrow's post-reveal family dinner. This was going to become family lore. The time Leo bought Gerald's company right after being told to get a real job. It would be told at every holiday gathering, every birthday party, every family event for the next decade. "Lindsay wants to know if she can be there when you tell Dad," Clara said, looking up from her phone. "It's a board meeting. Family members can't just sit in. She says she'll hide in the air vents. That's not how corporate buildings work. She's very motivated." I laughed and pulled Clara closer to me on the couch. The Penguin documentary was still playing. Definitely penguins, I could confirm now. And Pepper had settled back into her bed, satisfied that the excitement was over for the evening. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. It was just beginning. Somewhere across town, Gerald was probably asleep by now. Comfortable in his bed, in his house, in his certainty that the world worked exactly the way he thought it did. That consultants were just expensive PowerPoint makers. That his son-in-law was a disappointment who needed to get serious about his career. That tomorrow would be just another Monday at Baxter Industries, where he was important and respected and in control. Tomorrow, he'd walk into his office building like he had 1,000 times before. He'd pour his coffee, check his emails, maybe chat with the receptionist about the weekend. He'd straighten his tie, adjust his collar, and prepare for another week of being Gerald Baxter, regional director. And then he'd meet me, not as Leo Martins, disappointing son-in-law and professional consultant, but as Leo Martins, majority owner of Baxter Industries, and his new boss. The universe had gifted me the greatest setup in the history of poetic justice. Gerald had spent months, years, really, setting up the pins, and tomorrow morning, I was going to knock them all down in one perfect strike. I smiled and kissed the top of Clara's head. "Tomorrow's going to be interesting." "That's the understatement of the century," she murmured, snuggling closer. On TV, the penguins did whatever penguins do. In her bed, Pepper snored contentedly. Next to me, my wife scrolled through texts from her sister, occasionally giggling at whatever revenge fantasies Lindsay was cooking up. And in my head, Tomorrow's scene played out one more perfect time. This was going to be good. Monday morning arrived with the kind of perfect sunshine that makes you believe the universe has a sense of dramatic timing. I woke up at 6 a.m. without an alarm, which never happens. Usually, I'm the guy who hits snooze 17 times and considers consciousness before 8 a.m. a personal attack. But today I was up and ready like it was Christmas morning and Santa had left a corporate takeover under the tree. Clara was still asleep, her hair spread across the pillow in that way that would have been romantic if I wasn't too busy mentally rehearsing my entrance into Baxter Industries. I'd picked out my suit the night before, the gray one that Gerald had specifically called pretend business wear at brunch. Petty? Absolutely. Satisfying. You have no idea. Meanwhile, across town, Gerald Baxter was probably going through his usual Monday morning routine, completely oblivious to the fact that his world was about to tilt sideways. I imagined him strutting into Baxter Industries like a peacock who'd just won Best in Show, ready to dispense wisdom and corporate buzzwords to anyone unfortunate enough to make eye contact. And I was right, because I'd arrived at Baxter Industries at 7:30, early enough to grab coffee with Marcus and the legal team, late enough that Gerald would already be in his office doing whatever regional directors do to feel important on Monday mornings. Probably reorganizing his desk accessories. Maybe practicing his signature. Definitely not expecting his unemployed but good at PowerPoint son-in-law to walk in as his new boss. The Baxter Industries building was one of those corporate structures that tried too hard to look impressive. All glass and steel, with a lobby that echoed and a fountain that probably cost more than my first car. The kind of building that screamed, "We have money and we want you to know it," without actually saying anything of substance. Very on-brand for Gerald, honestly. Marcus met me in the lobby, looking unusually excited for someone who normally maintained the emotional range of a particularly calm Buddha statue. "You ready for this?" he asked, adjusting his tie. "I've been ready since Sunday brunch," I replied. "This is going to be beautiful. The CEO is already upstairs. HR is prepared. Legal is standing by. We've got all our ducks in a row." And Gerald, in his office, completely unaware. I checked with reception. He came in at 7, grabbed his usual coffee, chatted about the weather. Business as usual. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. We took the elevator to the executive floor, because of course Gerald's office was on the executive floor, even though he wasn't technically an executive. Regional director with delusions of grandeur would be more accurate. But who was I to judge? Well, actually, as of today, I was literally the person whose job it was to judge, but that's beside the point. The CEO's office was at the end of the hall, a corner space with windows that overlooked the parking lot where I could see Gerald's BMW parked in a spot labeled, "Reserved for G. Baxter." The man had a reserved parking spot. I made a mental note to have a conversation about that later. Nothing says regional director who thinks he's more important than he is, quite like a personalized parking space. Thomas Chun, the current CEO, soon to be former CEO, but he was being surprisingly gracious about the whole acquisition thing. Greeted us with the weary smile of someone who'd been dealing with corporate politics for too long and was honestly just relieved someone else was taking over. "Gentlemen," he said, shaking our hands. "Everything's prepared. The board is assembled. We're just waiting for you to give the word." "Has anyone told Gerald yet?" I asked. Thomas smiled. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting for this question. Not a word. He has no idea corporate sold to you. As far as he knows, this is just a routine board meeting about quarterly projections. When's he being called in? 9:03. We figured the extra 3 minutes would build suspense. I like Thomas. He had style. At 9 a.m. sharp, the board meeting began. Marcus and I sat at the head of the table, literally at the head, in the chairs usually reserved for the CEO and COO. Thomas had graciously moved down to a side seat, and the rest of the board members filed in looking like people who'd been told about the acquisition but hadn't quite processed what it meant yet. There were about 15 people total. Department heads, senior management, a couple of board members who'd held on to their positions through the acquisition. They all had that new ownership, who dis? Energy that comes with corporate transitions. Nervous, curious, trying to figure out if they should update their resumes or not. At 9:03 exactly, Thomas wasn't kidding about the timing. The door opened, and Gerald walked in. And oh, it was glorious. He strutted into that conference room like a man who'd never experienced doubt in his entire life. Shoulders back, chin up, tie perfectly knotted. He had his leather portfolio tucked under one arm, and that expression of practiced confidence that middle managers wear like armor. He probably thought he was being called in to give insights on his region, maybe get praised for his performance, possibly even get promoted. He had no idea he was walking into his own surprise party. Surprise, Gerald. Your son-in-law owns your company now. Hope you like humble pie because we're serving it fresh. Gerald's eyes scanned the room, doing that thing where you assess who's present and where you rank in the hierarchy. He nodded at a few familiar faces, probably calculating his importance relative to everyone else. Then his eyes landed on me, and I watched, in real time, as his brain tried to process what he was seeing. First came confusion. That's weird. What is my son-in-law doing here? Confusion. The kind where you see someone out of context and can't quite place them, like running into your dentist at a grocery store. Then came the flicker of recognition. Oh right, that's Leo the consultant. The dismissive oh. Then, and this was my favorite part, came the dawning realization that I wasn't sitting in a visitor's chair or standing awkwardly in the corner. I was sitting at the head of the table, in the big chair, the chair that meant something. Morning, Gerald, I said pleasantly, like we'd just bumped into each other at Starbucks. I took a sip of my coffee. Excellent coffee, by the way, much better than the stuff at brunch. Thanks for joining us. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked like a fish that had just realized it was no longer in water, but couldn't quite figure out how it had gotten onto dry land. You work here now? He finally managed to stammer out. The question hung in the air like a pop fly that everyone knew was going to be caught, but we all wanted to watch the arc anyway. Not work, Gerald, I said, maintaining that pleasant, conversational tone. Own, there's a subtle difference, but I'm sure someone with your business acumen can appreciate the distinction. Thomas cleared his throat, trying not to smile. Mr. Baxter, let me formally introduce you to Leo Martins and Marcus Nguyen of Stratton Advisory Group. As of last Friday, their firm acquired controlling interest in Baxter Industries. They'll be overseeing all restructuring and operational decisions moving forward. I watched Gerald's face cycle through more emotions than a mood ring at a teenager's sleepover. Shock, disbelief, confusion, anger, more confusion, a touch of panic, and finally, that special kind of horror that comes from realizing you've massively underestimated someone. He started, then stopped. Tried again. When did? The acquisition was months in the making, Marcus said helpfully. Very thorough process. Due diligence, financial analysis, regulatory approval. You know how it is with corporate transactions. Lots of paperwork. Lots of PowerPoints. I nearly choked on my coffee at that last bit. Marcus, bless him, had delivered it with the exact same casual tone you'd use to comment on the weather. Gerald sank into the nearest chair without being invited to sit, which was very unlike him. Gerald Baxter always waited to be invited to sit. He was a man of protocols and hierarchies. But right now, his legs had apparently decided that standing was too much to ask and had taken executive action. But you're a consultant, he said weakly, looking at me like I'd just performed a magic trick he couldn't figure out. Was a consultant, I corrected gently. Now I'm more of a, what would you call it, Marcus? Owner? Majority shareholder? Your boss. All of the above, Marcus confirmed. The silence in that conference room was the kind of silence that has weight. The kind where you could hear the air conditioning humming and someone's watch ticking and Gerald's entire worldview shattering into tiny pieces. I opened my laptop, the same laptop I'd used yesterday at brunch when Clara and I were watching Penguin documentaries and plotting this exact moment. Right then, let's get started, shall we? I've prepared a presentation. I paused for effect. PowerPoint, naturally, since I'm so good at those. Someone at the table made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. I clicked to the first slide. It was titled, Welcome to Accountability, in big, friendly letters. The subtitle read, A Restructuring Presentation. Gerald stared at the screen like it had personally betrayed him. Before we begin, I said, does anyone need coffee? Water? Antacids? I looked directly at Gerald. We want everyone to be comfortable for this. Thomas was biting his lip so hard I thought he might draw blood. Marcus had adopted his best poker face, but I could see the amusement dancing in his eyes. The rest of the board members were looking between me and Gerald like they were watching the world's most corporate tennis match. Gerald opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. This has to be a joke, right? This is some kind of elaborate prank. Hidden cameras? Is this one of those YouTube things? No joke, Gerald, I said. No cameras. Just good old-fashioned business. You know, the real kind. With corner offices and stock options, and all those things you mentioned yesterday. I advanced to the next slide. Speaking of which, let's talk about your region's performance numbers. I've got some questions. And just like that, Monday morning at Baxter Industries became the most entertaining board meeting in the company's history. Gerald sat there, still processing, while I began the presentation that would change everything. This was better than I'd imagined. This was perfect. The silence in that conference room was so thick you could spread it on toast. Like artisanal toast at one of those hipster cafes where they charge $12 and call it elevated bread experience. That kind of thick. The air itself felt heavy with the weight of Gerald's shattered reality and my barely contained satisfaction. Gerald sat there blinking at me like a computer trying to process too much information at once. You know that loading wheel that spins when your browser freezes? That was happening behind his eyes. I could practically see the little rainbow circle spinning while his brain attempted to reconcile. Unemployed son-in-law who needs career advice with guy who just bought my company and is currently sitting in the power chair. You work here now? He stammered again, because apparently his brain had gotten stuck on that one question like a scratched CD. Remember CDs? Gerald definitely remembers CDs. Probably still has a collection of them in his BMW. Not work, Gerald. I repeated, really savoring each word like a fine wine. Or like revenge, which, let's be honest, tastes way better than wine. Oh, there's a subtle difference, but I'm sure a man with your extensive business experience can appreciate the nuance. The CEO, Thomas Chun, who was rapidly becoming my favorite person in this entire building, cleared his throat. He was trying so hard not to smile that his face was doing interesting things. Mr. Baxter, as I mentioned, Mr. Martin's firm now holds controlling interest in Baxter Industries. He'll be overseeing the restructuring process, operational changes, and all major strategic decisions moving forward. I watched Gerald process this information. It was like watching someone try to solve a Rubik's Cube while wearing oven mitts. Technically possible, but painful to observe. Restructuring, Gerald repeated slowly, like he was testing out the word for the first time. Strategic decisions. That's right, Marcus chimed in helpfully. Comprehensive organizational review. We'll be examining all departments, all positions, all operational procedures. Standard stuff when new ownership takes over. You understand, I'm sure. Very thorough process. Gerald's face had gone from its usual self-satisfied pink to an interesting shade of gray. Like concrete. Or oatmeal. Uncooked oatmeal that had given up on life. But yesterday, Gerald said, and his voice had that quality of someone trying to make sense of a dream that had turned into a nightmare halfway through. Yesterday you were at brunch. You were unemployed. You make PowerPoints for a living. Made PowerPoints, I corrected gently. Past tense. Though to be fair, I'm still pretty good at them. Which brings me to today's presentation. I gestured at the projection screen where my first slide was still displayed in all its glory. Welcome to accountability. A restructuring presentation. I let that sink in for a moment. I worked on this all last week. Really put my heart into it. Used animations and everything. Someone at the table, I think it was the CFO, made a sound that was definitely a suppressed laugh, trying to masquerade as a cough. Nice try, CFO. I appreciated the attempt at professionalism. Gerald tried to laugh. It came out sounding like a car that wouldn't start. This is a joke, right? Some kind of elaborate setup. Punked or something. Is Ashton Kutcher going to jump out of that cabinet? Ashton Kutcher hasn't done punked in like 15 years, Gerald, I said. Also, that show was fake pranks on celebrities, not legitimate corporate acquisitions. Though I can see how you might confuse the two, given how surreal this must feel for you right now. Marcus pulled out a folder, a very official-looking folder with the kind of weight that said legally binding documents inside, and slid it across the table toward Gerald. Everything's documented here. Acquisition agreement, transfer of ownership, regulatory approvals, the works. You're welcome to review it with legal counsel if you'd like. Gerald stared at the folder like it might bite him. How? When did you even? This takes months. Corporate acquisitions don't just happen overnight. You're absolutely right. I agreed. This one took about 8 months, actually. Very complicated process. Lots of late nights, conference calls, due diligence meetings. But we managed to keep it pretty quiet. Corporate was very cooperative about the NDA situation. They really wanted to close the deal before word got out and spook the market. 8 months, Gerald repeated. The wheels were turning now. I could see him doing the math. That means you were working on this during Christmas dinner? Yes. Valentine's Day, when you lectured me about fiscal responsibility? Also yes. That weekend in March when you suggested I look into getting my real estate license as a fallback career? Definitely yes. We were in final negotiations that week, actually. I smiled. But please, continue telling me about the importance of stability and corner offices. I find it educational. The board members were no longer even trying to hide their reactions. A couple of them were grinning openly now. One woman, I think she was head of HR, was literally biting her fist to keep from laughing out loud. Even Thomas had given up on maintaining CEO dignity and was just openly smiling. Gerald looked around the table, probably hoping to find an ally. Someone who would back him up, tell him this was crazy, demand answers about how some consultant nobody had just waltzed in and bought the company. But everyone was either looking at their papers, studying the ceiling, or watching this unfold with the kind of fascination usually reserved for nature documentaries about apex predators. This isn't. Gerald stopped, started again. You can't just waltz in here and take over like this. There are protocols, procedures. The board has to approve major changes. The board did approve, Thomas said smoothly. 2 weeks ago. Unanimous vote, actually. We sent out the memo last Friday after close of business. You might have missed it if you left early. Gerald's eye twitched. Actual visible twitch. I didn't get any memo. It went to senior management, Marcus explained. Regional directors received a different communication. More general, less detailed, which is why you're learning about this now instead of 2 weeks ago. The implication hung in the air like a bad smell. Gerald wasn't senior management. He'd thought he was, clearly. Had probably told everyone at the country club he was senior management. Put it on his LinkedIn with strategic capitalization. But in reality, he was middle management at best. Regional director wasn't the same as regional vice president, and everyone in this room knew it except, apparently, Gerald. Right then, I said, clicking to the next slide. Let's talk about your region, shall we? Because I have to tell you, Gerald, the numbers are fascinating. Really quite fascinating. The slide displayed a graph. A very damning graph. The kind of graph that asks uncomfortable questions and demands uncomfortable answers. It showed consulting expenses, Gerald's favorite thing to mock, but these were his region's consulting expenses. Specifically, the educational consulting budget that had somehow ballooned to 3 times the national average over the past 2 years. These numbers are creative, Gerald, I said, using the same pleasant tone you might use to compliment someone's garden. Very creative. In fact, they're so creative that our forensic accountants are still trying to figure out exactly what all this educational consulting actually consisted of. Care to enlighten us? Gerald's face went from gray to red. Those are legitimate business expenses. Educational seminars for physicians. Industry standard practice. Industry standard. I repeated, clicking to the next slide. This one showed a comparison between Gerald's region and every other region in the company. His expenses stuck out like a middle finger in a lineup of thumbs. You know what else used to be industry standard? Leaded gasoline. Asbestos in buildings. Just because something's standard doesn't make it ethical or legal. I was following protocol. Gerald's voice had risen about an octave. He was losing his cool, which was satisfying in a way I hadn't fully anticipated. Everything was approved by compliance. Interesting, Marcus said, flipping through his own set of papers. Because according to our review, compliance signed off on about 40% of these expenses. The other 60% seemed to have bypassed the approval process entirely. There's a note here saying they were pre-approved by regional authority. That's you, right? You're the regional authority. Gerald opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He looked like a fish doing impressions of a fish. Now, I'm not saying anything illegal happened, I said reasonably. I'm just saying that when new ownership takes over, we like to make sure everything's above board. Transparent. Accountable. I smiled. You understand, I'm sure. Man of your experience and integrity. The HR director, her name was Janet, I remembered now, spoke up for the first time. Mr. Baxter, as part of the restructuring process, we'll need you to provide detailed documentation for all expenses over $5,000 from the past 3 years. The new ownership wants a complete audit of regional spending patterns. That's, Gerald started, then seemed to realize he was about to say something incriminating. That's a lot of paperwork. Luckily, I said cheerfully, you've got time. Because as of this afternoon, you're being placed on administrative leave while we conduct the review. The room went completely silent. Someone dropped a pen, and it sounded like a gunshot. Administrative leave, Gerald repeated. He said it like he was translating from a foreign language. You're suspending me? Not suspending, Janet clarified, because HR always has to clarify. Administrative leave pending review. Fully paid, of course. We're not monsters. You'll retain all benefits during the investigation period. It's standard procedure during ownership transitions when there are accounting discrepancies. Investigation, Gerald said faintly. Routine investigation, Thomas added quickly. Could be nothing. Could be everything. We won't know until we review all the documentation. I clicked to the next slide. In the meantime, we'll need your access card, company phone, and laptop. Again, standard procedure. Nothing personal. Just business. I paused. Real business, you might say? The kind with actual consequences. Gerald stared at me like I'd just announced that gravity had been canceled and everyone was floating now. You can't do this. This is humiliation. In front of my colleagues. Oh, I wouldn't dream of humiliating you in front of your staff, Gerald. I said sincerely. That's what the company-wide restructuring memo is for. HR sends it out this afternoon. We made sure to include your suspension, administrative leave, in the update section. Very professional. Very matter of fact. Janet even included a note about how we're serving cake in the break room to celebrate new ownership. Chocolate. Everyone likes chocolate. Marcus was smiling now. Full smile. He'd given up all pretense of professional neutrality. The cake's really good, actually. We tested a few bakeries. Went with the place on 4th Street. You know the one. Gerald looked like he was having an out-of-body experience. Like his soul had left the chat and his body was just sitting there on autopilot, waiting for someone to reboot the system. Any questions before we continue? I asked pleasantly. Gerald had no questions. Gerald had no words. Gerald had nothing except the slowly dawning realization that he'd spent months mocking a man who was quietly buying his entire world out from under him. And honestly, that realization looked heavy. Good thing he'd have plenty of time on administrative leave to process it all. The board meeting continued, and honestly, it was like watching someone's ego get systematically deconstructed in real time. If TED Talks covered corporate revenge, this would have gone viral. I could see the title now, How to Buy Your Father-in-Law's Company and Destroy His Sense of Self-Worth in Under an Hour. We moved through the slides methodically, each one peeling back another layer of Gerald's carefully constructed kingdom of mediocrity. Marcus handled the financial breakdowns while I provided what I like to call contextual commentary, which is consultant speak for sarcastic observations that make people uncomfortable. Let's look at Gerald's regional performance over the past 3 years, I said, clicking to a slide that showed sales numbers. Interesting pattern here. Sales remained relatively flat, while expenses tripled. That's quite an achievement, actually. Most people struggle to spend that much money without generating proportional results. Takes real dedication. Gerald had gone quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Not zen quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when someone's internal monologue is screaming so loud they can't form external words. He sat there gripping the edge of the table like it was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become liquid. That's why I hired 3 former FDA compliance officers to explain it to me. Very educational. They used a lot of words like ethically questionable and technically legal, but definitely sketchy. Really expanded my vocabulary. Marcus pulled up another document on his laptop. We also found some interesting patterns in prescription data from your region. Seems like the doctors who attended your golf seminars, educational programs, wrote significantly more prescriptions for Baxter products immediately afterward, specifically for the medications with the highest profit margins. That's called effective marketing, Gerald shot back, but his voice lacked conviction. He sounded like a defense attorney who just realized his client was absolutely guilty and the jury knew it too. It's called a lot of things, I said pleasantly. Marketing is one of them. Bribery is another. Kickback schemes is a third. The legal team is still deciding which term applies best to your situation. The color drained from Gerald's face so fast I briefly worried about his blood pressure. Not worried enough to stop, mind you, but briefly worried. Thomas Chin jumped in, probably sensing that Gerald was about to either faint or explode. To be clear, Mr. Baxter, we're not making accusations at this time. This is purely an investigative review. If everything checks out, you'll be reinstated with full apologies. And if it doesn't check out? Gerald asked weakly. Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I said. Probably with lawyers. Definitely with lawyers, actually. Very expensive lawyers who bill by the 6-minute increment. The kind who wear watches that cost more than mid-sized sedans. Janet from HR cleared her throat. Mr. Baxter, I think this would be a good time to discuss the administrative leave process. You'll need to turn in your access credentials before you leave today. Today? Gerald looked like she'd just told him to report for execution. You want me to leave today? Well, we can't have you accessing company systems during an active investigation, Marcus explained reasonably. That would be like letting a suspect hang out at the crime scene. Not technically illegal, but definitely bad practice. I'm not a suspect, Gerald protested. I'm a 20-year employee with an impeccable record. I clicked to another slide. Define impeccable. Because according to this, you've had 3 formal complaints filed against you in the past 5 years. 2 for inappropriate comments to female staff members. 1 for expense report irregularities. They were all quietly settled by HR with non-disclosure agreements. Sarah from compliance winced. Those were handled at the regional level. Corporate wasn't informed. Interesting how that works, I mused. The regional director investigates complaints about the regional director and finds himself innocent. Must be nice being judge, jury, and defendant all at once. Gerald stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with that awful sound that makes everyone's teeth hurt. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. This is character assassination. Slander. Actually, it's only slander if it's false. Marcus corrected helpfully. If it's true, it's just called facts. Also, since we're in a private meeting and not making public statements, it would technically be libel, not slander. But I appreciate your commitment to legal terminology even when you're using it incorrectly. I stood up too, maintaining eye contact with Gerald. You're right though. You don't have to sit here. You can leave anytime. In fact, you should probably go clean out your desk. Take your personal items. Your motivational posters about synergy. That photo of you shaking hands with the Regional Sales Achievement Award guy. The coffee mug that says, World's Best Boss that you definitely bought for yourself. How do you know about my coffee mug? Gerald asked, thrown by the specific detail. I did a walkthrough last week. Due diligence. Met with department heads, toured the facilities, checked out the regional offices. You were at that golf seminar in Phoenix. The educational one. About pain management solutions and proper swing technique. Gerald's mouth opened and closed several times. He looked around the table one more time, desperately searching for support, sympathy, or at least someone who would make eye contact with him. But everyone was suddenly very interested in their notes, their phones, the fascinating pattern of the wood grain on the conference table. This isn't over, Leo, he finally said, and his voice had that quality of someone trying to make a dramatic exit, but knowing it's going to fall flat. Technically, it is, I replied calmly. That's what administrative leave means. Your involvement with day-to-day operations is over, at least until the investigation concludes. Could be weeks, could be months. Depends on how deep the accounting discrepancies go. You ruined my career, Gerald said, and there was real pain in his voice now. Not the performative kind he used when he wanted sympathy. The real kind that comes from watching your carefully constructed image of yourself crumble like a sandcastle at high tide. I prefer to think of it as a career realignment program, I said, keeping my tone light, but not cruel. There's a difference between satisfying revenge and unnecessary cruelty, and I was trying to stay on the right side of that line. Trying being the operative word. Same goal, professional development, just fewer ethics violations. Think of it as forced personal growth. Janet handed Gerald a folder. This contains information about the administrative leave process, contact information for employee assistance programs, and details about how to access your benefits during the review period. You'll also find information about legal representation if you feel you need it. If I feel I need it, Gerald repeated bitterly. You're investigating me for crimes, and you're saying if I need a lawyer. Technically, we're investigating for compliance violations, Marcus clarified. Whether those violations constitute crimes is for law enforcement to determine. We're just focused on the corporate side right now. Gerald took the folder with shaking hands. For a moment, I almost felt bad. Almost. Then I remembered Sunday brunch. The mimosa waving. The consulting is code for unemployed speech. The corner office bragging. The 20 years of treating me like I was too stupid to understand how the real world worked. The feeling passed. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings, Thomas said, his voice gentle but firm. It's standard procedure. Nothing personal. Nothing personal, Gerald laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. My son-in-law bought my company, put me on suspension, and is having me escorted out by security, but it's nothing personal. Well, when you put it that way, it does sound personal, I admitted. But I assure you, the investigation is purely professional. The satisfaction I'm getting from this moment, that's personal. But the investigation is professional. Important distinction. A security guard appeared at the door right on cue. He was a big guy, the kind who looked like he took his job seriously, but not seriously enough to enjoy it. Mr. Baxter? I'm here to escort you to your office. Gerald looked at the security guard, then at me, then at the rest of the board. You're all going to regret this. I have friends in this industry. Connections. I'll land on my feet, and you'll all see that you made a mistake. I hope you do land on your feet, I said, and I meant it. Sort of. I really do. Just preferably at a company that doesn't mind creative accounting and golf seminars disguised as medical education. I hear there are still a few of those left. Might want to update your resume, though. Maybe leave out the under investigation part. That tends to raise questions during interviews. Gerald grabbed his portfolio, the leather one he'd carried into the meeting like it was a shield against mediocrity, and walked toward the door. He paused in the doorway, turned back one last time. Clara's going to hear about this. Clara already knows, I said cheerfully. She's the one who suggested I wear the gray suit. Said you called it pretend business wear. Wanted me to wear it today specifically. Marriage is all about supporting each other's petty revenge fantasies. That final detail seemed to break something in Gerald. His shoulders slumped. He looked like a man who'd just realized that not only had he lost the battle, but he'd never actually been winning the war. He'd just been playing a different game entirely while everyone else had moved on to the real competition. The security guard held the door open. Gerald walked through it. And just like that, Gerald Baxter's reign as the most insufferable person in my life came to an end. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a slam. By noon, the news had spread through Baxter Industries faster than free pizza in a college dorm. The consultant had bought the company. The disappointing son-in-law was now the boss. Gerald Baxter, Mr. Corner Office himself, the man who never missed an opportunity to remind everyone about his stock options and company car, had been officially placed on administrative leave and escorted out by security like a corporate criminal on some bad cable drama about white-collar crime. I stood by the window in what was now my office, formerly Thomas's office, soon to be renovated into something less corporate beige nightmare and more actually functional workspace, and watched Gerald stomp across the parking lot toward his BMW. Even from 5 floors up, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the angry way he yanked open his car door, the aggressive slam that followed. He stood there for a moment, staring at the building like it had personally betrayed him. Then he pulled out his phone and started gesturing wildly while talking into it. Even without audio, I knew exactly what was happening. He was calling someone, probably Patricia, possibly his lawyer, maybe just his voicemail because he needed to yell at something, and explaining how he'd been ambushed, humiliated, destroyed by his ungrateful consultant son-in-law who didn't understand real business. Marcus appeared next to me with 2 cups of coffee from the executive break room. He's been standing there for 10 minutes. Think he's okay. Define okay, I said, accepting the coffee. Physically? Probably. Emotionally? That ship sailed around the time I clicked to slide 3. The golf resort one. The golf resort one. We watched Gerald continue his animated phone conversation. He was pacing now, doing that thing where angry people walk in tight circles because standing still requires more calm than they currently possess. A few employees walking to their cars gave him a wide berth, probably having heard the news and deciding that getting involved in whatever meltdown was happening was above their pay grade. You know what the best part is? Marcus said, sipping his coffee. He did this to himself. We didn't have to manufacture anything. The numbers were real. The expenses were real. The questionable ethics were real. All we did was shine a light on what was already there. That's what makes it perfect, I agreed. This isn't revenge. It's consequences. There's a difference. Gerald finally got in his BMW, and I watched him pull out of his reserved parking spot, the one with his name on it that would be repainted by tomorrow morning. He drove to the parking lot exit, stopped, and for a second I thought he might turn around and come back. Make one more dramatic scene. Demand one more confrontation. But he didn't. He turned left onto the main road and disappeared into traffic. Just another angry guy in a luxury sedan having the worst Monday of his life. Think he'll bounce back? Marcus asked. I considered it. Eventually. Guys like Gerald always do. They'll reframe this as a learning experience. Tell everyone how the company made a mistake letting him go. Land some other regional director position where they can continue being mediocre with confidence. But today? Today he's sitting in that car realizing that the son-in-law he mocked is now his boss. That the consulting nonsense just bought his entire world. That maybe, just maybe, he should have kept his opinions to himself at brunch. I smiled. And that, my friend, is worth every minute of the last 8 months of paperwork. Marcus raised his coffee cup. To PowerPoints. To PowerPoints, I echoed, clinking my cup against his. May they always be more powerful than corner offices and stock options. Through the window, I could see the parking lot where Gerald's reserved spot sat empty. Tomorrow, someone else would park there. Someone who earned it through actual competence rather than tenure and ego. And somewhere across town, Gerald was probably still on the phone, still explaining, still trying to make sense of how the world had turned upside down in one morning. The thing about karma is that it doesn't arrive on your schedule. It shows up when you least expect it, dressed in a gray suit you once called pretend business wear, holding a PowerPoint presentation and a smile that says, "Remember me?" This was going to be a good week. That evening, my phone rang before I even got home. Clara's name lit up the screen, and I could already hear the chaos in the background before I answered. "Leo," she said, half amused, half horrified. "Dad's having a complete meltdown. He says you ambushed him." Ambush is such a harsh word, I replied, pulling into our driveway. I'd call it an educational seminar on humility. Very corporate, very professional. She laughed despite herself. He's been ranting for hours. Something about PowerPoints and revenge and how consultants are destroying America. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Leo, was this necessary?" I typed back, "So were seatbelts." People mocked them until life hit hard. Clara sighed in my ear. "You could have warned us." When? At brunch. Between the insults and him telling me to get a real job. I locked the car and headed inside. Besides, timing is everything. I'm a consultant. Was a consultant. Whatever. You really waited for the perfect moment, didn't you? I'm a professional, I said. Timing is literally the job. She was quiet for a second, then burst out laughing. God, you're terrible. Terribly effective, I corrected. My family is never going to forgive you. Your family is going to dine out on this story for decades. Weeks later, Baxter Industries was thriving under new leadership. We'd cleaned up the mess Gerald left behind, pivoted to ethical products that didn't require golf resort educational seminars, and actually made money without court subpoenas hanging over our heads. Funny how that works when you run a business with integrity instead of creative accounting. Gerald? He was now in career transition, which is corporate speak for unemployed but too proud to admit it. Last I heard through the family grapevine, he'd started doing motivational speaking about resilience and overcoming adversity. Mostly to himself in the mirror, according to Lindsay, who'd become my unofficial spy in the Family Drama Network. The next family brunch was gloriously awkward. Gerald showed up late, avoided eye contact with everyone, and spent most of the meal studying his eggs Benedict like they contained the secrets of the universe. Patricia kept trying to make polite conversation that everyone ignored. Derek looked uncomfortable. Lindsay was having the time of her life. I ordered the executive omelet, because subtlety was never my strong suit. Raising my coffee cup, I smiled at the table. To real jobs, and normal people. Clara almost choked laughing. Gerald's mimosa trembled in his hand. And as I leaned back in my chair, I thought, some people chase promotions. I prefer acquisitions.